Fantastic, thanks. Hello, and welcome to TMA. I'm excited to see so many of us packed into the Glass Pavilion for what will undoubtedly be an amazing day today. But first, let's start off with our land acknowledgement. The Toledo Museum of Art is located on the ancestral homelands of the Erie, Kickapoo, Ottawa, and Seneca. We recognize that many other Native tribes have also conducted trade on and called this region their home, including the Lenape, Miami, Ojibwe, Peoria, Potawatomi. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Sauk, Shawnee, and Wyandot. We at the museum acknowledge and honor the past, present, and future lives of Indigenous peoples in the Toledo area and thank them for their resilience as stewards of the land on which the museum's campus now resides. Now, as you may have noticed, I'm not Adam Levine. Our director's flight back from New York was canceled and scheduled to hopefully return to us later this morning. He's disappointed to not be here to kick off the symposium, but we should hopefully see him soon. So in his place, I will do my best to sound director-like and to ease you into the day as you sip your coffee. I don't know about all of you, but I am looking forward to the program and impressed about what we're going to cover today. In a single jam-packed day, we're going to witness some inspiring presentations, explaining how some of our colleagues have been tackling the conceptual and logistical issues around reinstallation specifically, but more broadly, how reinstallation projects can expand our understanding of the critical role museums play in society. I have no doubt that today will remind us of the profound power of art and the great responsibility we bear in preserving and presenting it. We at TMA are honored to be the convening space for such a vital and robust discussion on what could be considered the most pressing issues facing museums in our generation. I look around this room and I see trusted colleagues and old friends, but I also see many new faces. Many of you have likely never been to TMA before. You perhaps heard about our collection, but you never had the opportunity to make a trip, and we are excited to welcome you and hope that you enjoy your visit. As you look around this room, I hope that you feel inspired by a collective group of individuals who are all equally inspired by art and our ability to change people's lives through engagement with it. In addition to what we will gain through the thought-provoking presentations and enlivened discussions over coffee and lunch, I hope that you will leave today with new connections, energized to go back to your institutions and institute change. We at TMA are excited to be a partner in this journey that we are all on together. Looking ahead to the future of museums, it is abundantly clear that we must embrace change. Museums are not static entities, frozen in time, but dynamic and evolving institutions that must adapt to the ever-shifting needs of our communities. We have a responsibility to engage with a diverse range of audiences, to be inclusive spaces that welcome and celebrate all voices. But how can we do that when our collections do not currently reflect the broad range of people that we are trying to serve? We all acknowledge that we need to diversify our collections, but the artworks that we shepherd were comprised in a certain way, often based on over 100 years of collecting, in a certain philosophy that is now being challenged. Therefore, we need to be creative, agile, and adaptable as we are all working within constraints, whether they be collection-based, financially based, staffing-based, or as with most of us, all of the above. Our colleagues who have been through this process will be sharing today some of their tips for navigating these tricky issues to help set the rest of us up on the path to success. Since equitable representation, at least in this stage of our institutional histories, is not possible, we must find ways to actively amplify marginalized voices, providing platforms for them to share their stories, perspectives, and experiences. In doing so, we can foster a more equitable and inclusive society. However, as we embark on this journey towards the future, we should not forget the importance of maintaining relationships with our current visitors. We need to strike a delicate balance between engaging new audiences and nurturing the existing ones who have supported our institutions throughout the years. By maintaining this delicate equilibrium, we can build bridges between generations, connecting diverse audiences and fostering meaningful dialogues. But museum collections vary widely, and therefore reinstallations will differ as we balance between larger goals in the field and the specific needs of our own institutions and communities. Each of you must find the thread that carries your own institutional voice and vision into the future as we embark on a reinstallation project of any scale. For instance, at TMA, we identified that our key concept in moving towards inclusion without falling into the trap of tokenism is to focus on quality. Our realization came when we acknowledged that there is actually no need to compromise because quality knows no bias. Quality emerges across time and geography. As long as we ensure that the works we exhibit are of the highest caliber, they will naturally celebrate artists and their vision across space and time. Yet, as this symposium certainly reinforces for all of us, this sort of progress does not come without significant effort. It is the result of passionate individuals, dedicated institutions, and collective action. It requires self-reflection, open dialogue, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Reinstallations are more than just the presentation of the collection. There are many layers and intersections that align for a cohesive vision. Leading up to the reopening of our galleries, we will have formalized a new collecting strategy, a belonging plan, an interpretation strategy, a visitor satisfaction strategy, as well as developed a new brand identity and data culture, and who knows what else we're going to come up with between now and then. As such, it is our sincere hope that through the reinstallation project, we transform how we work as an institution, aligning staff from across various departments with the museum strategy. By embracing this challenge as a team, we can forge a future that is more just, more inclusive, and more reflective of the vibrant tapestry of human experience. As many of you have kindly acknowledged already, putting on a symposium is a lot of work. So I would like to express my warm thanks to the staff who have been planning this day for well over a year now. Although almost everyone has contributed in one way or another to this undertaking, I would like to extend a special thank you to the symposium team led by Robert Schindler and Willow Gritzmaker, with a huge assist by Duffy Maddox, the special events and catering staff, maintenance and utilities staff, visitor experience, and the IT department. I would also like to extend my appreciation to all of our speakers who said yes when we asked them to share their insights and wisdom on this challenging process of reinstallation, as well as the Terra Foundation for American Art and the National Endowment for the Humanities, who provided funds to make this day possible. As I wrap up these opening remarks, it is my sincere hope that you will leave this symposium at the end of today with a renewed sense of purpose and commitment, ready to tackle the beast that is reinstallation at your own museums, wherever you are on this journey. I hope that this gathering will be the first spark that continues to grow. Just as we have discovered within our team that working collectively across the museum provides more thoughtful, engaging results, I would extend the same concept to the museum field. Let's not tackle reinstallation as siloed institutions, but rather learn from and lean on each other as we do our best to push our field into the future. Together, we can create spaces that foster empathy, understanding, and appreciation for the transformative power of art. Now let's dive in. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Robert Schindler, who is going to continue our introduction. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Toledo. As it goes with these things, we've barely started and we're already behind, so I'm trying to keep it very short. Welcome to Toledo. If you've attended last night's reception and had an opportunity to look around the museum, I hope you enjoyed it. I have a feeling in talking to some of you yesterday, there are quite a few in the room who've never been to the TMA before. And I'm curious how many that might be. If I could get a raise of hands who's never been here before. and we're documenting that. Thank you very much. We're thrilled you're here. I also extend a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us virtually. Accessibility was important to us, which is why we were keen to make these sessions at least also available online. We're also doing live captioning for you in the room, as well as the people who are joining online. We did provide a limited number of travel stipends to make it possible for those who may have otherwise not been able to come in person to attend. I'm glad you're here. Finally, this event is free of charge. My objection is just twofold. I want to tell you a little bit about why we're doing this in the first place, and then just walk you a little bit through the logistics of the day. Now, as you know by now, scheduled now for mid-27, we will reopen our own reinstallation. And later this morning, you will hear from my colleague Diane Wright, Senior Curator of Class and Contemporary Craft, about where we're at in our thinking along this journey. As a curatorial team here, we've done quite extensive traveling around the States to speak with colleagues who have undertaken similar efforts already. It really became clear that there wasn't an opportunity to come together as a field to discuss these ideas, especially as apparently everybody is thinking about reinstallations, reinterpreting collections today, especially as a field and as institutions, we're coming to terms with the colonial and racist histories and legacies of our own institutions and their continued impact on what we do and how we do it today. So we wanted to bring people together to learn about what projects people have been up to, approaches they've taken, hear about lessons learned, and gain insight into ongoing planning for future projects, and provide a platform to exchange ideas and experiences. That, in a nutshell, is the origin of today's symposium. And clearly, we've hit a nerve, as we had about 170 practitioners from the museum field and adjacent fields to sign up and come in person. It looks like, from looking around the room, pretty much everybody showed up. When we began planning this symposium about a year ago, I remember saying that I would be thrilled if we got 80 people to come. So I think we're doing quite all right. We also had about 210 people sign up to join us virtually, and we're creeping up to that number now in the live stream. We then also decided to tie in the symposium with the new installation of a part of TMA's collection of American art entitled Expanding Horizons, the Evolving Character of a Nation. And that explains the overlap in title between this installation and the symposium. The installation serves as both an experiment and an invitation. It explains, it's organized along two themes: myth-making and religion, which bring together objects from different time periods and media and aim to highlight how art can reveal and question aspects of national identity and character. Extensive visitor data collection, and you will be asked to participate, accompanies this installation, which will inform the planning for the museum-wide reinstallation. You will have an opportunity after lunch to go visit, as well as talk to some key staff that was involved in the planning and execution of this. That also explains why there is a noticeable difference, emphasis on American art in the presentations that are beginning shortly. They will include, reflect on projects that have already been completed, the process behind them, illuminate some lessons learned, but also provide insight into ongoing planning. Talks will range from broader strokes to more focused discussions of presenters' respective areas of responsibility within the project, whether that be a curator or collection area, interpretive planning, community engagement, etc. We'll have two sessions this morning with a coffee break in between, then lunch, which will be just outside in the corridor here. And then after lunch, we invite you to walk over to the Green Building, where the reception was last night, to visit Expanding Horizons. Given the number of people, which we were not expecting initially, we need to manage the number of people in the space at any given time. So on your badges, you will find a group number and the time slot. And we ask you to stick to that. Paula will remind you before lunch as well. Everybody else is invited to just roam the museum and explore, including our special exhibitions. And of course, I encourage you to take full advantage of the opportunity to reflect and discuss with colleagues from many museums across the country that are represented here today. For our online audience, please rejoin us under the same link for sessions 2 and 3 at the times indicated on the program. You'll find that information also on our museum website. Just briefly, what's on view at TMA, there's Black Orpheus, Jacob Lawrence and the Mbari Club. The show chronicles Lawrence's extended stay in Nigeria and puts his work into context with other works by members of the Mbari Artists and Writers Club. There's Machine Auguries, a 12-minute long multi-channel sound and light installation by Alexandra Daisy Ginsburg. There's limited capacity in the space. We did reserve some slots for you, but if you're interested, please make sure after lunch to go over early to make sure we can accommodate you. Also, do check out our newly installed gallery. Work was finished yesterday. Africa Unmasked, which commemorates 65 years of collecting and exhibiting African art at TMA. I also mentioned our Cloisters Gallery, which reopened last December after an extensive rethinking, reinstallation, and reinterpretation, which puts European Middle Ages into a broader historical and geographical context. There's Gallery 29. There is in your back is a map that points you to where those numbers are, where the presentation of American pre-1900 art has recently been rethought. Finally, if you have time, go see the Robert C. and Susan Savage Community Gallery, which is downstairs, dedicated to showing the work of local and regional artists. Currently showing Our Belonging, a solo exhibition showcasing the work by Findlay, Ohio artist Ambus. Museum is free to the public. This badge gets you in for free in all the special exhibitions as well. After visiting Expanding Horizons or free time in the museum, we reconvene here at 3 p.m. if you like coffee, and promptly at 3:30, we will meet here seated for the last and final session. And then followed by concluding remarks. If Adam Levine arrives in time, he'll deliver. If not, we reconsider. But so finally, a heartfelt thank you to all my colleagues, my many colleagues who made today possible. I'm the one who's standing up here, but it truly was a team effort. Part of the work that we do at TMA is cross-functional. There was a team of about a dozen plus minus TMA staff from marketing, design, learning and interpretation, visitor service. Andrea alluded to it already, who were critical in putting this together. And I'm sincerely grateful to all of them. And I hope we can extend a warm thank you applause to the people involved in putting this together. Thank you. Then I too am very grateful to our speakers for accepting the invitation and travel to Toledo to share their stories and projects with us. And finally, I thank all of you for making the trip. And for joining us for today's presentations, and I hope you have a good and fruitful visit. With that, we're going to move into our first series of presentations. We are not doing extensive introductions to the speakers. You'll find that information in your program. I did mention we're providing live captioning. If you're online, please make sure that that button is pushed at the bottom of your screen so you do see the live captioning if you like to. The event is recorded, and we are doing 3 presentations in this first session and then a combined Q&A at the end. Now, our first speaker is Caroline Rochelot, Director of Research and Curator of Ancient Art at the North Carolina Museum of Art. A large TMA group visited Raleigh early this year, and I highly recommend you make the trip as well. But I'm grateful to Caroline for giving us a glimpse of this project today in her talk, Reimagining the People's Collection, the Ancient Collection Perspective. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Robert and the TMA team for inviting me to share with all of you, not just them, when they came to visit. So I'm happy to be here and start the day. And I'll see if I can make up some time. Let's try, right? So the NCMA opened its reinstallation of the People's Collection in October 22, so not quite a year ago. And this project was basically to offer a more inclusive, a more dynamic experience of the arts. Just like was mentioned, I think everybody is trying to do that these days. So I want to share a little bit about that, but coming from the ancient collections perspective, the need of that specific collection being included in the whole reinstallation along with my colleagues and their own collections. If you've never been to the NCMA, we have a very large campus with a 264-acre park. And on this campus, there are 2 buildings that are dedicated to the galleries and the display of antiquities and art. Today, I will focus exclusively on West Building, which is the main collection building, if you will, from antiquity to modernity. The East Building is where global contemporary is, and our exhibitions and our offices. So we'll focus on West Building today, but should you come to NCMA, please visit both of them. West Building is actually the pavilion that we opened in 2010, the Tom Pfeiffer building. So that was already a reinstallation not that long ago, 12 years ago. And this is the building that we are working with for this installation. Now, West Building, as you can see, is a big square building that has different suites of galleries that are sort of interrupted by these gardens that intrude into the building itself. And we see nature inside the building because of all the glass walls. So this is the floor plan that we have to work with. And there are, of course, advantages and limitations with any kind of building. You have to work with what you have. And in our case, there was no construction at all. The only thing that was sort of like renovation wise was the information desk that was removed, and the dividing walls. If I just go back quickly, those small tiny walls, east-west walls, those are movable, but nothing else could be touched. So we have to work with this building to put in all the ideas that were trickling in our mind. So some of the advantages of this building, it's 1 story. We don't have to divide up a collection between 2 floors, which happens in some institutions. It's also an open concept building, which means that it's easy to connect with the gallery next to it. That in of itself is also a limitation because it makes it hard to maybe create a more intimate area that you want to focus on that perhaps doesn't connect to all the galleries around. With this building, with the gardens that I mentioned, with the glass walls and the oculi in the ceiling, there is also a lot of light in this building, which means that any installation we have to do needs to include multiple rotations. So that's something you have to think about every year. Okay, what needs to move? And do we have to change the themes if we move some of these objects out? With this building, we also have named galleries. And this was probably the first thing we looked at because we have donors who helped with funding those galleries. Are they funding the space itself? Or are they funding basically the display of the art in those galleries? So we had to take a close look at the plan with all the donor names and see if we could actually move those galleries. Lucky for us, most of them, yes. They were not tied to the physical space, but to the art that was displayed inside the room. So when you move the art, the name comes with it. And then we have some works of art that cannot be moved at all whatsoever. Our friend King Saul, a recent acquisition of a few years ago, the statue weighs, and the base weighs 9,000 pounds. That is 4.5 tons. I'm just putting that out there. We had to shore up the floor for this statue to reside on this spot, and King Saul is never moving again. That was the parting gift of our previous curator of American art. I don't know if he's watching. So that is a limitation. If you want to move anything related to American art, it has to revolve around King Saul. The other two galleries were the Iris and Gerald Cantor Court and the Zeiss Sculpture Court. You can't really move the courts. It's in the spine of the museum, contains multiple statues. You can move the statues around, but the courts can't move. And even if you wanted, let's say in the Zeiss court, where you could potentially remove the sculptures, where are you going to put them? They're too big to fit in the small galleries. So these are the limitations we had to work with. So this is the plan before the reinstallation. And I would like to bring your attention to the little title at the bottom of my slide in brackets, in italics, that the African collection was actually not displayed in this building. It was in 2010, and with the light issues, it had to be moved back to the old building, in quotes, until we could figure out how to make the space a little bit more light sensitive or mitigate the light for certain collections, because otherwise we had to rotate African art, and that's, yeah. Anyway, so it was not in this gallery when we did our study. And I want to bring your attention as well to these orange spaces. AA means Ancient American, AE, Ancient Egyptian, Invisible A, GIR, Ancient Greece, Italy, and Rome. So these are the galleries that I take care of, although I have a colleague working with me for the Ancient American. That's his specialty. And so the two of us are working together with the antiquities. And this is just really irked me on so many levels. First of all, the antiquities collection are segregated in their own little corner away from the arts collection, as if they were not part of human creativity for thousands of years, as if they're not the same as art. They're not. It's material culture, you know, coffins and all sorts of pots and whatnot. But it's part of human creation, and a lot of it has inspired later periods. So I think they play a role in sort of the broader history of human creativity. And yeah. The other thing is that little AA gallery, Ancient American, in that tiny little box. Just to say a little secret, the Ancient American collection is slightly bigger than Egypt, Greece, Italy, and Rome put together. Why does it have a tiny little space when it's just as big and just as important? So those are the things going on in my head for those very specific collections. Now I have to take you back a few years when we actually started this project, the year 2019, when the world was a very different place. We started this interchange project where in the galleries, the collection galleries, we started displaying works of art and antiquities from different different historical periods, different cultures together, but grouped thematically to create a dialogue between objects, between cultures, between time. We're pretty much all human, right? And we have similar concerns, ideas, and we wanted to explore that in the building with these little pockets of thematic spaces that visitors would just kind of happen upon and say, oh, that doesn't belong here. And look at the labels and look at the dialogue that was going on there. So we started with that. Here's another slide. We started with that, and just to see what our visitors would respond, how they would respond, and they responded really well. They enjoyed the contrast, the comparison, the similarities, and that to us said, maybe we should consider having thematic galleries, not just little groupings of art, but actual galleries dedicated to a specific theme. And that was very exciting because we ended up with this huge list of possible themes to approach. However, you have just one building with limited space, so we had to pick two that will rotate perhaps annually or by every other year sort of thing. So we picked the arts because at the NCMA, we have visual arts, but we also have concert programs, we have movies, we have poetry slams, we have other arts that strangely enough are represented in our collection with works from different culture. Conservation has been very popular through exhibitions, so we dedicated a gallery to that. And then there were interpretive spaces that we wanted to have where you can have discussions, dialogues, pose a question, and invite reflection. And one of them was Egypt, Africa, the diversity of the continent. And the other one is Defining American Art, which I think comes back in some of the later talks today. So we wanted to dive into these issues. Now, we didn't do this in a vacuum. We had consultants that we worked with. And keep in mind, we're now in 2020, and we're doing this all on Zoom. Nobody got to come to our museum. We never met these wonderful consultants in person. That in itself was a challenge because they didn't see the collection in the building. They just saw the collection on our PowerPoint, which is not quite the same thing. But the consultants were absolutely wonderful. Some ideas, they totally ran with it. It's like, you guys, you're on the right track, but perhaps consider this. Or have you thought about that? And so it was invaluable information that they gave us. And that was very fruitful and very important to our project. When we could also work in person, 6 feet apart with your mask around the big, huge model that we have here, our dollhouse, we were having discussions. We're trying to put our ideas into the building, intangible into a physical space. So we're talking, we're leaving each other little messages because we're not there at the same time. We had our little piles of discarded photo, little images. It's like, ooh, if you're not using this work of art, can I use it? And the plastic dinosaur made its rounds also through the galleries. So a quick recap of what we're trying to do. Bring Africa back to West Building, make sure that the Ancient American collection has 3 suites of galleries, add 2 thematic spaces, add 2 interpretive spaces in that building that I showed you. How can you do that? With the limitations I also mentioned. Well, start with a clean slate. First of all, it's much easier when you remove everything and look just at the floor plan. Now, there was an idea that popped into my mind, and I really cogitated on this for a while. I wasn't sure it was going to work. I chatted with my colleague, the research curator for the Ancient American collection, chatted with the African curator, like, okay, you guys like this idea. Should we propose this to the curatorial department? And this was the idea. Based on what the building looks like, with the collection needs, with the interpretive needs, with the thematic gallery needs, what if we have these continental groupings? And the reason I hesitated is because we're trying to get out of those silos, trying to show connections between collections, cultures, and time period. And everybody's like, yes, please, because this works with this particular building. Those gardens actually do create these sorts of quadrants where you can put something, it's sort of giving you that possibility of creating a smaller space within a bigger space. And that's what we ran with. And that's how I could suddenly redistribute the ancient collections. So we have 3 rooms for ancient American. It is now elevated, and I like that word, elevated to the same level as ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, Italy, and Rome. But with this continental grouping, you can do things. And first, I also want to point out, of course, some people said, well, you're missing Asia from your plan. Yes, but we don't have Asian art. So we can't quite include Asia in the galleries in those continental groupings. And the smattering of works of art that we have would go then in the thematic spaces. Although nobody's actually looked at our Asian collection, so I'm pretty sure that Tang Dynasty horse might be fake. But if there are any colleagues in the audience who are Asian art experts, please see me after. But anyways, so we will feature Asian cultures in exhibition programs instead. So with this, we can do that. The little blue squares are actually the interpretive space. You want to talk about Egypt in Africa? There's that little room between Pharaonic Egypt collection and the very more recent African collections. And we can dive into those discussions. And those are the little spaces that are perhaps less utilized or that help you create a special environment to make that connection. This is a special room. There's something going on here that we don't have in all the other white spaces. And just to give you a quick view, this is the Africa We Ought to Know gallery, where we explore everything from Egypt and Africa, the Kingdom of Kush. I love your Nubian pharaoh that just appeared yesterday, just at 5 o'clock. If it ever goes missing, you'll find it in North Carolina. We dive into other issues related to more recent African art, like colonization, looting, repatriation, things like that. So we really dive into the continent. This is the Africa we all ought to know without the biases that have been there for hundreds of years. Similar gallery made in the Americas, slightly different, where we make connections between Africa, the Americas, and Europe through trade, the exploitation of resources and people and things like that. So it's a different type of gallery, but it invites those discussions. And then we have our thematic galleries, the arts, and the conservation gallery. And the arts will be rotating, but it's right there up front when you come into the building, telling the visitor something is different, but it's not different everywhere. There are little pockets of galleries where suddenly all the arts, all the cultures, all the antiquities, all the time periods are represented thematically. So we have this along with the collection galleries. This satisfies our docents who would otherwise be looking for where's our favorites. It's still all there. It's just in different places. Now it's a little bit more nuanced than what I just told you. There is contemporary and modern art in West Building, and you see it, the pink areas, and we have that also in the African collection, which is both historical and contemporary. And I'm leaving you on a slide of these galleries. Pictures do not convey what's going on in there, but I invite you to North Carolina to visit us and see these galleries in person. And I just want to point out quickly, they changed my email address on Tuesday. So, so what you see in the program will get to me because they will, forward it, but that's actually my new email address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline. And in the interest of time, we're moving swiftly along. Next, I welcome Amelia Wiggins to the podium. Amelia is now the Director of Advancement and External Affairs at the Delaware Art Museum. In a previous role at Delaware, she led interpretive planning and audience development. She'll talk to us about centering community voices in reinstallation planning in the context of Del Art's 2021 reinstallation. Welcome.
Excuse me. Thank you. I'm excited to be speaking to you all today about how we can center our communities during planning.
My museum is the heart and the hub of this community.
That was Wilmington activist and Del Art community advisor, Bibi Coker, speaking about what her museum means to her. How can art museums transform into spaces that are the hearts and the hubs of their communities? Relevant spaces where all see themselves and feel a sense of belonging. Today, I'll share some of the interpretive practices that the Delaware Art Museum has been employing to forward that vision, including convening listening sessions and community advisory committees, prototyping narratives with visitors, displaying community-created interpretive content, strategic acquisitions to diversify collections, and artist commissions. I'll share the challenges I see in transforming traditional systems of museum work, as well as the greater institutional change that emerges when museums center our communities. The collections held in museums have the power to shape how our public see themselves and the world around them. Like the books we read, art can be mirrors, reflecting our identity, windows on perspectives outside of our own, and sliding glass doors that open and immerse us into new worlds. But museums aren't just collections of objects, powerful as they may be. Museums are highly trusted repositories of history. They're sources of authority, impacting careers of artists, values of collections, the way the past is remembered, the stuff that lives on beyond our lives. Museums are vehicles for storytelling, both in the gallery's walls and also in what is left unwritten. And finally, museums are community gathering spaces, shared places where people come together on equal terms, in dialogue with each other and with the art of the past and the present. What happens when a museum changes from temple to forum, shifting its focus from preservation to people? Del Art has seen such a change in the past decade. As a regional art museum with eclectic collections of British Pre-Raphaelite paintings, American illustration, and American art, Del Art was long known as a hidden jewel box tucked away in a wealthy neighborhood of Wilmington, Delaware. But in 2017, a new strategic plan re-envisioned the museum as a vital hub, a welcoming and inclusive place where artists, educators, and community groups could come together to engage in cultural and civic discourse around art. Del Art started seriously looking at who we were serving and who we weren't, confronting our institutional whiteness, including lack of diversity within staff and board, visitors' reports of feeling unwelcome, institutional histories of exclusion, and the fact that we weren't reflecting our city of Wilmington, Delaware, and its majority Black population. Before we could widen who we served, we needed to do internal work, and the museum invested in diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings for staff, trustees, and volunteers. Staff attended museums as sites for social action, mass action, specifically to focus on the project of our upcoming reinstallation and new ways of working together. At this time, we were also starting to experiment with community-created content within special exhibitions. Temporary exhibits offered us opportunities to share the stories and amplify the voices of our diverse community outside of programming. In 2018, I started inviting non-museum professionals to write exhibition labels and share their perspectives on audio stops. And I'll share just one of these labels, this one written by University of Delaware professor Dr. Roderick Carey on Gerard Gaskin's photo above from Del Art's presentation of the exhibition Posing Beauty. Ballers. On a basketball court somewhere, some Black men turned it. Black men, ball players who came to ball in their sweaty tops with muscled arms. They compete intensely with piercing focus while onlookers snap and film and cross their arms. Some cheer, some jeer, yet all adore them because he's one of us. They're all of ours. And you're here too, and they hear your eyes, feel your taunts, see the names you call them. Still, their mirror reflects Black boldness, bravery, Black beauty. With the mirror facing you, can you see what these ballers share with you? It's the most resounding human yearning for acceptance, for adulation somewhere, for a place somewhere to matter. And on this crowded court, we cheer for those picked last or never, for those brave little Black boys who build gowns of bed sheets, and for Black men somewhere who turn basketball courts to ballrooms. Label writer Dr. Roderick Carey reflected on his experience sharing his voice with museum audiences, saying, "In my research, I advocate for shifting the representational lenses that engulf Black boys. Likewise, in my label, I hope to challenge viewers' assumptions about what representational forms Black masculinity can take and comment on the beautifully diverse ways it shows up in the world." Dr. Carey's expertise and his lived experience expanded my own understanding of this work of art. And similarly, visitor exit surveys showed that a significant portion of our audience found that these community labels changed how they saw the works of art on view. A further strategy for centering our community members' voices has been convening special exhibition advisory committees, a structure of long-term guidance over 1 to 2 years from paid external leaders. This structure has helped Del Art learn about, connect with, and authentically present the art and stories of diverse cultures, including our local Caribbean, African American, and Indigenous communities. Advisory committees challenge the museum to work and present in new ways. There's often a critical point at Del Art in which feedback is given that spurs us to research and examine internal histories and continued practices of racism, and then act on the fundamental promise that we make to each of these advisors, which is that we will honor their expertise and respond to their guidance. But despite these initiatives, we were still hearing from visitors that they didn't see themselves represented in the museum, especially in our permanent collection galleries. So a main floor reinstallation provided an opportunity to apply what we were learning in exhibits and through programming to our core collection spaces. And a central goal of the reinstallation became building relevance for our local communities. To achieve it, we needed to center their voices during the planning process itself. Internal collaboration was also central to the project. We formed a 4-person core reinstallation team, a mix of curatorial and interpretive expertise. And pictured here with me are my colleagues, Margareta Frederick, Heather Campbell-Coyle, and Sarah Lynn Rosenfield. This team-based approach required significant investment in relationship building, trust built over years of small collaborations, willingness to change working methods, open sharing of goals and values. I found professional courtesy went a long way in breaking down departmental silos, as did physical proximity. At this time, I moved my office to outside of the chief curators. Together, we convened a reinstallation workshop with professionals from the field we hope to learn from, and this helped us understand each other's differing philosophies, as well as garner ideas from other museums. And kudos to Toledo for holding this incredible symposium today to gather so many museum professionals to discuss interpretation. A museum can listen deeply and talk with representative groups of community members before we start making plans, before we start defining themes, before we tell stories, before we create checklists and gallery layouts. And community salons were our strategy for centering those voices at the earliest stage of planning. These were facilitated dialogues that brought together diverse community members, staff, museum stakeholders in two-way conversations that helped us learn how people perceive the museum and its spaces, the art they were drawn to, what they were curious about. We invited and paid select partners, community leaders, artists, stakeholders, members, and each was asked to bring a friend who is unfamiliar with the museum to join curators and interpreters in the galleries for conversation. These rich discussions taught us so much about how locals perceived Del Art's collections, what connections they made to it, what was relevant to them at this time in our city, and what was going unspoken. The salons ultimately guided the new narratives created for the museum's 2021 reinstallation, with staff returning to the recording subsequently over the 18 months of planning. Participants' feedback and questions also led to new curatorial research and discoveries. A second strategy was the prototyping that came next. This was a radical departure from how we typically worked on gallery planning, and we were fortunate to be able to learn from the expertise of Kathleen McQueen. Instead of developing content in our offices away from visitors, we started testing ideas and stories live on the gallery walls for visitors to respond to. We wrote down ideas from the salons on butcher paper, we'd tape them to the wall, leave out Post-it notes and pencils. We were intentionally breaking from the pristine display of our art museum's galleries. And we learned that handwritten tape text communicates experimental and invites feedback in a way that a finished panel cannot. Visitors started writing back. The reinstall team met weekly to read all of their responses. Together, we all saw immediately when it wasn't working. Visitors' notes showed that they'd missed our meaning, they disagreed with us, or even worse, they were just not interested. So we iterated. We made revisions on the wall to clarify our meaning. We taped up images as examples. We changed our approach. We were writing in conversation with each other in front of the art instead of alone at a computer. And curators, which I am in awe of this, they often took on immediate research to be able to respond to visitors' questions within the week before we checked again. We tested and kept iterating until we saw signs of success, which for us was a number of sticky notes engaging with the prototyped idea. Even more exciting was when visitors began writing back and forth to each other, responding to Post-its left before theirs. This was the museum acting as a vital hub, bringing people together in discourse. Visitor input not only shaped the wall text, but also informed our gallery layout. And I think I'm one slide off. Sorry about that. Visitors had an insatiable curiosity for the story of a local abolitionist turned religious leader, Absalom Jones, which spurred a reorientation of our American galleries. And here, the doorway to our historical American collections now frames Absalom Jones on the left. And because visitors weren't satisfied with a mere summary of Jones' life story, we invited the historian of the church he founded to write a takeaway brochure to do it justice. A new wall panel here also addresses the history of enslavement in our state and connects it with the portraits on view. Visitors' perspectives also influenced the design of the new galleries. A persistent confusion we heard from visitors was about the name of a key collection, pre-Raphaelite art. We worked really hard to clearly define that term. But what really struck a chord was when we put up this large contextual image of industrial London. Visitors got it. The smoky, polluted city was inspiring these young artists to form a new art movement and to obsessively detail renderings of the natural world. Prototyping centered community voices within the museum's planning process, but we wanted to keep that polyvocality alive after the galleries reopened. So we developed a permanent collection audio tour that weaves together personal reflections on works of art from a variety of people. And I'll share the audio stop for the painting on screen as an example.
This oil painting, entitled Mother of Moses, depicts Jochebed holding her child Moses, whilst his sister Miriam holds the rush basket ready for Moses to be placed in the River Nile. This was to enable Moses to escape the Egyptian royal family's decree that all newborn Hebrew boys were to be slain. The pre-Raphaelite artist Simeon Solomon painted both Jochebed and Miriam from earlier drawings he had created of the model Fanny Eaton. Simeon used Fanny as a model for his biblical works, as he was known to want authenticity, but probably didn't know at that time that Fanny was actually Afro-Caribbean. Simeon's drawings and paintings of Fanny are some of the earliest images of her before the other pre-Raphaelite artists started to use her as a model. Indeed, it may well have been Simeon who first discovered her. Fanny also modeled for the Royal Academy's life classes until her husband James's death in 1881. She is now to be seen in many other works of art in galleries around the world. Fanny Matilda Eaton was born in Jamaica in 1835, the illegitimate child of a freed slave, Matilda Foster. Fanny and her mother traveled to London sometime in the 1840s, where Fanny met James Eaton, a cab driver. They had 10 children. I am Brian Eaton, a great-grandson of Fanny, descended from her youngest child, Frank. I live in England and have traveled all over the world to see the images of Fanny, and I'm proud to tell you this story today.
Response to Mother of Moses has been so strong that we've since moved this painting to an even more central spot in the galleries and added additional layers of interpretation, including a didactic with images of Fanny and Simeon Solomon, and a takeaway brochure that shares more of their stories, including the story of persecuted gay artist Simeon Solomon. Black, Jewish, and queer visitors are not only able to see themselves and relate deeply to these stories and the subject and artists of the work, but also to see and relate to one another through the interpretation of a singular visual. The painting invites rich cross-cultural exchange between audiences, and that's an outcome that we hope to work toward in other collection areas in the future. Keeping the participatory spirit of the prototyping alive once the project ended also meant encouraging the communication between visitors that we saw during the planning process. In a reimagined gallery of the artist and activist John Sloan, we created a participatory station that asked visitors, what role should artists play in our national discourse? The popularity of the station has shown us how much visitors crave opportunities to leave their marks and share their voices. And we hope to increase those opportunities in future interpretation. And I look to Denver, who is doing an incredible job in that space as an example. At times during planning, we also needed to seek out additional specific guidance and expertise beyond our visitors. Early on, we reached out to leaders from the Lenape and Nanticoke tribes of Delaware to guide our reinterpretation of representations of Indigenous people in our American galleries. And we also needed help looking more deeply at Delaware's collection of American illustration through the lens of race. We convened a group of illustrators of color and local Black leaders to help us re-examine some of the museum's most overtly racist images, including this illustration for Cream of Wheat by Catherine Wireman. The advisors told us we must display this work, and they helped us recognize that visitors needed to immediately understand why it was on the wall. They stressed that contextual information couldn't be relegated to a single object label, as I had unsuccessfully tried already. This reinterpretation needed to be as visible as the artwork itself. In response, we redesigned this gallery to focus on just a few of the illustrations and their interpretation. We produced an in-gallery video that shares the voices of diverse illustrators and illustration scholars, reflecting on these objects displayed alongside them and as large as the work itself.
Whose truth do these illustrations present? What story do they tell us about the racial dynamics in America? I see in these images the hint of uncomfortable intimacy. It's in the prodding touch on the shoulder from a woman to her attendant. I see it in the imagined hands of the shadowy presence that is holding the balance of precariously placed children. It is there in the careful construction of a toy meant for commercial consumption. In service. That's how race is imagined. A sidekick. In the shadows. Moving out and away by request. Only centered to appeal to the consumer. And even then, the rendering is of a chef in service of your palatable desires.
That was Dr. Tanya Leslie sharing one of 6 responses that now play in the galleries. While the new narratives help put a focus on Black and female artists and subjects in the reinstallation, we also needed to acquire new works to tell a more inclusive story. Near Cream of Wheat, we designated a space for a rotation of illustrations by Black illustrators, made possible by more than 20 new acquisitions in this area. And this William Wise painting was purchased just days before the reinstalled galleries opened to help expand the stories of models like Black models like Fanny Eaton in the Victorian art world. Artist commissions have been another strategy for expanding the stories we tell with art to better reflect our community. We transformed a highly visible space at the museum's entrance called Orientation Hall and dedicated it to visibly reflecting the people of our city. So rotating exhibitions in the space have included portraits of Black Wilmingtonians, photographs of our region's essential workers, and pictured Indigenous faces of Wilmington by the Nanticoke artist Andre Wright Jr., which became the first works of art by a Nanticoke artist to enter our collections. The methods I've shared today bring new challenges for museums. These relationship-driven strategies are much more time-intensive than traditional museum work. I believe I might be the smallest museum presenting today, and at a museum like Del Art, funding this additional staff time has been particularly challenging. Building and sustaining multiple relationships with community groups and individuals long-term has also not been easy. The Lenape and Nanticoke relationships that we forged took 4 years. And while acquisitions, artist interventions, and commissions and loans can offer opportunities to expand, the limitations of our historical collections are still defining. Responding directly to visitors means timelines and plans shift as you go, affecting staff across the institution as decisions change. And even at a little organization like us, communicating institutional history and major new directions to colleagues and stakeholders who might not be in the room to hear those community members' feedbacks has been difficult. But small efforts multiply. After the reinstalled galleries opened, Del Art initiated a new tour dedicated to representations of Blackness, led by a new team of diverse museum educator apprentices. This tour could only happen because there was a critical mass of artwork sharing Black experiences across our collection galleries for the first time post-reinstallation. Educator Stephanie Morton reflected on her students' experience, saying, "Now the artwork they see looks like art they can create. The people in the art look like people they know. The stories seem like their grandparents' stories. They can see themselves." And I want to offer a resource that I've found helpful personally as an alternative way of imagining how we work and what we can build when we step outside the white supremacist structures, which still define our practices. This is the Black Space Manifesto, and I'll voice just a few of its tenets. Move at the speed of trust. Be humble learners who practice deep listening. Plan with, design with. Center lived experience. Seek people at the margins. Reckon with the past to build the future. Del Art, like so many of our museums, is on a journey to institutional change, driven by that central question of the museum's role in its community. Developing relationships, building trust, sharing empathy, responding to what we hear, honoring those voices and amplifying them. These are the methods that lead to transformation, to museums that serve as the heart and the hub of their communities. Thank you.
That was powerful. Thank you, Amelia. Also in 2021, the Denver Art Museum reconceptualized the presentations of the majority of its collections. And Stefania van Dijk, Associate Director of Interpretive Engagement at Denver, is here to share with us their process in her talk, In Partnership, Centering Collaboration in Planning the Denver Art Museum's Reinstallation.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I guess I'll start by saying great minds think alike. You'll see some similarities with Amelia's presentation. We have a very similar approach, so it's fun to see that, but hopefully some differences too. I'll be focusing on collaboration, which in our minds is just as important internally as externally. So I'm talking about that as well. But I really wanted to start with a story about how we had for decades been displaying an object within kind of a biased and underinformed interpretation. In early 2019, the team at the Denver Art Museum working on the reinstallation of the Northwest Coast and Alaska Native collection traveled to Vancouver, BC to see museums, meet colleagues, have studio visits with artists, and take in the landscape. They wanted to work with the Indigenous artist, Marianne Nicholson, in some capacity for the installation. So they met with her and she casually mentioned that the museum has this figure, which you see here on the left. Apparently it was known throughout her community that this figure actually has a rich history that complicated the more colonialist centered understanding of the object that we had been using as interpretation. So our team spent a lot of time talking about this with Marianne. She flew to Denver to examine the piece. and she created a new artwork in response. So what we had thought for decades was that this piece was a welcome figure that a band of Kwakwakiwak gifted to the farmer who newly occupied land that was once theirs. So essentially it was understood as a symbol of peace between the Kwakwakiwak and the farmers to whom the Canadian government gifted what had been Kwakwakiwak land. The real story is that from 1885 until 1951, the Canadian government outlawed important aspects of Kwakwakiwak culture, like the potlatch ceremony. The government also began to take land away from the Kwakwakiwak. Through a series of acts, the Canadian government annexed Kwakwakiwak lands for timber supply and farmland. And this welcome figure was created during this time. So instead of linking the pole to a now illegal potlatch ceremony, as it would normally have been, Johnny Scow, who was a leader of a band of Kwakwakiwak, and also the great uncle of Marianne Nicholson, had this pole made to be given to the farmer who occupied a particular parcel of land where Native women had been driven off from harvesting their clover root gardens. Scow's intention for this gift is not a gesture of supplication to colonial encroachment, as the museum and newspapers at the time had presented it, but an assertion against it. It was an act of a symbol of protest. So rather than peace, it was protest. The revelation of this story led to a new focus and presentation of the figure in the gallery. So this is what that's Marianne kind of talking to our team, looking at the piece. Here's how it looks now. So on the left, you'll see a glass panel that Marianne Nicholson made kind of as a result of all these conversations and research. In it, she recalls historic pictographs painted on cliffs of Petley Point near Kingcombe Village, which commemorates the illegal potlatch hosted by Johnny Scow and his brothers in 1921. Hosting a potlatch was a profound act of resistance that, like the welcoming figure, defied colonial occupation. By revealing the layers of history behind places and things, Marianne Nicholson continues this tradition of activism and protest through art. And between the two pieces, the welcome figure and Marianne's piece, is a video of her telling this story. So I tell you this to illustrate the importance of collaboration and all that comes with it: active listening, discomfort, responsiveness, budget, trust, flexibility, in the process of reinstalling our permanent collections opening in 2021. So let's start talking about that process. In 2021, we reopened our historic Geoponte design building, which you can see in the background on the right, including reconceptualized presentations of 9 of its 12 collections. So during my time today, I'll focus on the collaborative process that collection teams underwent with each other, with community, with advisors, and with artists like Marianne Nicholson. So a little orientation, the DAM, by the way, our acronym is DAM, so I'm not swearing, I'm just saying the name of our museum. The DAM is made up of 3 buildings: the Hamilton building, the pointy one, which you see on the left, part of, the Welcome Center, which is a glass building that was designed and added as part of the 2021 reopening in the center, and the Martin building on the right, which is the gray tower that you see. And this might help. This is a rendering of our campus. That's the Martin building on the right. And I'll run down the collections quickly that we reinstalled as part of the project I'm discussing. It was a lot. So this is the second floor. Yep, second floor where the welcome figure lives, and also the home of architecture and design. The 3rd floor is our Indigenous Arts of North America. 4th floor, Arts of the Ancient Americas, Latin American art, and modern and contemporary Latin American art. 5th floor is Asian art. 6th floor is European and American art before 1800, and textile art and fashion and photography. And finally, our 7th floor is our Western American art collection. And then we also have our 3 other collections: modern and contemporary, Oceania, and arts of Africa, that were on a different schedule. They just opened this past May. So I'll primarily be talking about the building on the right and focusing on collections that are more relevant to this symposium. So here's kind of a rough timeline of the process or of reconceptualizing our presentations of our collections in the Martin Building. And I'll touch briefly on what each of these steps entailed so you can relive this journey with me in 20 minutes or less. Before our building closed in 2017, we did several visitor studies around how visitors responded to the existing presentations of our permanent collections to help us give a direction on the new reconceptualizations. So the interpretive specialist for a given collection either led or organized each study, which generally took the form of a focus group or more focus groups. Here's a focus group exploring our Asian art floor in 2016. I won't dwell here on what we found, but needless to say, getting a baseline understanding of our visitors' experiences with the old installations was key to improving them. Then the building closed in spring of 2017. And at this point, teams were starting to have conversations about the reinstallations. And the next couple of years, we spent several years pre-planning. So lots of committees were formed. One was to look at those visitor studies that I mentioned, pull out commonalities that could help inform how all the teams would present their collections in new ways. And obviously the specifics would be particular to each collection, but there were some consistent takeaways as well that were important. We created committees centered around principles that are important to us as an institution, on practical matters. When I say there were a lot of committees, I mean there were a lot of committees. Members of each reinstallation team were on one or more of these committees, as were staff who weren't directly involved in the reimagining. Each committee developed a report that all of the reinstallations teams read, if it pertained to the actual presentations of the artworks and the integration. I think there were more than what I'm remembering now, but there were a lot. And they all did feel very important, of course, at the time, but it was overwhelming to process and internalize all of the discussions and information that resulted. So luckily, other parts of our planning process helped each team to and each individual to really hone in on aspects that were pertinent to them and, as far as we understood, to our visitors. One of those was team travel. So our budget allowed for most members of each team to travel to at least one other city or region to seek inspiration. So here you're looking at the images from the Northwest Coast team trip to the Pacific Northwest and to Canada. This is the trip that was the genesis of that welcome figure reinterpretation. Generally, the people who went on the trip were the core members of the reinstallation team, with some exceptions. Unfortunately, many times curatorial assistants weren't included. The rest of the team consists of the curator, who is essentially the primary content expert and the person who knows the collection most deeply. The interpretive specialist, who is more of the audience expert and works with the curator to pull out stories and strategies for presenting them. The designer. We only use contract designers at the dam and contract graphic designers. And for this building, each collection had a different designer so that each collection had a different personality and feel. And finally, the project manager, who keeps us all on task, on time and on budget, and coordinates with the designer and other fabricators. Every exhibition and installation we do at the museum has this core team. And I'm just going to digress for a second to talk about how we're organized. So there are, I think, right now about 15 curators and 6 interpretive specialists. Each interpretive specialist is paired with one or more collection areas, and the idea there is to develop a relationship. And also so the IS can learn those specific collections more in depth. It's this pair, the curator and the interpretive specialist, that makes up the core of our exhibition development process. So it's incredibly important that the curator and IS develop mutual trust and respect. We're really lucky because the structure has been in place for decades. When new curators and ISs come on board, they are told that This team will work closely together to craft exhibitions. It's a peer relationship, and we believe that each individual's role and experience is crucial to the exhibition's success. And to us, success means visitor engagement, not necessarily numbers, but well, to us, it's not necessarily numbers, but to some it might be numbers. But it's visitor engagement is kind of developing meaningful experiences is success to us. So team travel was an important part of our process for the reinstallations because among each team, it helped to, again, build and strengthen the trust that they already had, but also to bond over shared experiences. The trips also gave us an opportunity to meet with colleagues at other museums, as well as artists, and to observe visitors at other museums. And we spent a lot of time reflecting on our own experiences in the environments where we went. How do we behave as visitors? What are our implications for our audiences in Denver? In order to help process all these experiences and conversations in some concrete way, I facilitated 2-part visioning workshops for each team. I wish, Amelia, that we had brought in someone else to do it, but I did it. The first part was essentially an exercise in which we had discussion around 5 prompts. These were the prompts. My dream for this reinstallation is, if a visitor walks away with one thing after visiting these galleries, it would be. One thing I loved about the previous installation was. One thing I didn't like about the previous installation was. And my favorite thing about this collection is. I recorded key parts of the conversations on the whiteboard, and we began to see words and concepts repeated and emerged as crucial to the team's thinking. We ultimately distilled the notes and conversations to 4 to 6 words or phrases that would then be guideposts for the presentations of the collection. So the one you're looking at now is for our Western American art team. They had 6 guideposts, which to me was maybe 1 or 2 too many, but they were all very, very important to the team. So we didn't consolidate further. And you see those in yellow. Then we had a second part of the workshop on a subsequent session in which I asked the teams to come prepared with 2 things. One, I asked them to come with an answer to this prompt. The most memorable experience I've had in a museum, dam or other, was. And also I asked them to print out inspirational images from museums or other spaces that they've experienced, whether it's at the dam or somewhere else, whether specific to their collection or not, a component, artwork, general spirit of a space installation, whatever it was inspiring to them. And I also asked them to come with like wow images from their collections that were key to what they wanted to communicate. So we had discussions around what their favorite or most memorable experiences as visitors were. And we discussed the characteristics that made those visits so impactful to them as visitors. Things surfaced like activating other senses, surprise, juxtapositions, challenging expectations, seeing something in a new way, objects coming alive. It was very, very interesting because throughout the conversations, some folks, what they characterized as memorable for themselves as visitors were in direct opposition of what they characterized as important to them as museum professionals. So that was a really interesting conversation. Why do you want different things for yourself as a professional than you would want as a visitor? I posted their guideposts that the team generated at the previous workshop, and we clustered their inspirational images around each one, creating visual representations that they and their exhibitions designers could look at as they began reimagining their collections. So really the words and images that resulted became a shared visual and verbal vocabulary, unique to each installation team that helped them as they embarked on planning in earnest. Which obviously you all know what goes into the basics of planning an exhibition or a reinstallation, but here I'll talk about a little bit about how we worked with community. So we have a couple of standing advisory groups, Latino Audience Alliance and the Indigenous Arts Advisory Council. Each have about 8 to 12 members and meet regularly to advise on things across the institution, not just on displays. They played a big role not only in the presentation of collections related to them culturally, but also to other installations. We formed one-off advisory committees as well as groups of researchers and readers, like a mix of scholars, religious practitioners, and people who with lived experience to help us craft exhibition text to make sure it's factually accurate and culturally appropriate, for example, for our Arts of Asia collection. Because of their size, the large poles in the Northwest Coast and Alaska Native galleries where the welcome figure lives had to be among the first objects installed in our refurbished galleries. So the team worked with the community to make sure that that happened in an appropriate and respectful way. And I'd like to play a short video that explains that.
We're in the Northwest Coast and Alaska Native Galleries, which is part of the Martin Building's opening in phase 1 in June of 2020. With our reimagined and reinstalled Northwest Coast and Alaska Native Galleries, visitors will find a much more immersive environment. I'm standing in front of a house frontal post that was carved by Dwight Wallace in the late 19th century. This is one of 2 poles that are in our gallery, and visitors who have been here in the past have seen them installed up against the wall, but in this new reinstallation, we've brought them into the center of the space, and here you'll have an opportunity to walk amongst the poles. A project like this takes a lot of hands, and it was a really close collaboration between conservation, curatorial, the engineers who worked with this space. As part of the reinstallation of this gallery, we invited Lee Wallace and his family down from Southeast Alaska to do a pole raising ceremony. Despite the challenges of actually installing these in an active construction site, we were thrilled to be able to have the Wallace family here. Lee Wallace brought his daughter, 2 of his great nieces, and 1 of his great nephews to Denver with him to take part in the ceremony. And just to see this intergenerational sharing of knowledge, hearing them sing, hearing them interact with one another, hearing them talk about the stories of the poles, hearing them talk about just how important these are to their family history. It was quite special.
And just this was specifically for installing them. It was not a program or anything like that. It was to honor the poles and the cultures from which they came. And that was John Lukovic, our curator of Native Arts. So as a result of all the work that the teams had done up to this point, reviewing visitor studies, traveling with one and reflecting together, visioning workshops, interpretive principles that our interpretive engagement team developed, that's what's here, talking with advisors, artists, community members, we were able to tell stories that hadn't been told in our galleries before. This was the point where COVID hit. So a lot of this planning work had to be done virtually. And a side note to say that he said phase 1, June 2020, that didn't happen. So we were meant to open in phases starting then. So actually that floor, including Northwest Coast and Alaska Native and our architecture and design galleries, sat totally installed and unvisited for 1 to 2 years, whatever it was, a year and a half, yeah. So of course, the welcome figure is a great example of how we reinterpreted some objects based on new information or information that was new to staff. But stories also surfaced that we felt were important, but some of them didn't have collection objects to support them. We tried to tell those stories anyway, which seems like sacrilege in an art museum. For example, not only did the Western American art galleries now integrate Indigenous objects to tell a broader story, which they hadn't before, the team included a section about the diverse West, presenting diverse perspectives and telling lesser known stories from the American West was important for the planning team, even if there weren't objects in the collection to fully support it. One of the stories was about Black cowboys. So the estimate is that by 1890, at least 1 in 4 cowboys in the West was Black. So we felt like we had to make people aware of this in order to give them a fuller picture of the West and to experience the floor, which told the story of the West in a fuller way. So we commissioned Denver author and illustrator R. Allen Brooks to bring that story to life through a digital comic about the famous Black cowboy Nat Love. And there's some difficulties with this area. It's not perfect. It's an important story to tell, but it's kind of relegated to a corner behind a wall. So a lot of people don't see it. But those who do, we've gotten incredible feedback about the impact of it. Other stories were told by voices outside of the museum. So like at Dell Arts, we did things like for the James Earl Fraser sculpture, The End of the Trail, our interpretive specialist invited Indigenous artists and community members to offer their perceptions of it. So remember, this is in our Western American art collection, the art of which is historically by white Americans or European artists who depict their own biased ideas of the American West. The vanishing Indian, the manifest destiny, and all of those things. So to have Indigenous art and voices represented more clearly in these galleries was a new angle for us. The Indigenous Arts Advisory Council, of course, helped with that, and they also played an important role in the team's approach to the Indigenous Arts of North America, FLORA, of course. It was important to them and to the DAM team to dedicate space for respite. Many of the artworks on the Indigenous Arts of North America floor tell stories and themes that can be triggering and evoke a lot of emotion. So we wanted to make sure that if someone needed it, they could have a quiet space to recenter. That collection, Indigenous Arts of North America, had last been reinstalled in 2012, which was pretty recent relative to some of the others, which were 90s, stuff like that. And at that time in 2012, the radical shift was to prioritize artists' voices, to emphasize that Indigenous art is a living practice. But for 2021, the focus was on Indigenous voices more broadly. So a lot of the objects have stories outside of who made them. The interpretive specialist came up with the label program Our Voices, in which Indigenous people from various communities commented on an artwork that was particularly resonant with them. Here I'm showing a poem by Terrence Jade, who is a musician and rapper who lives in Pine Ridge, Wounded Knee, and he's responding to Fritz Shoulder's Massacre in America, Wounded Knee. He's transparent about his emotions toward the painting, anger, but also peace and perseverance. In fact, we know that pairings like this, among others, made an impact on our visitors. We conducted a holistic study of all the reinstallations in 2022, and comments like this came through relative to this floor. Quote, "I was so angry due to the historical context of genocide against Native Americans, though this anger is motivating. I was eager to find organizations to donate to or to volunteer for that may help serve modern Natives." So one side note that could itself be a symposium, we've recently been talking about our feelings relative to comments like this. While on the surface, it feels very like, hey, we did it. Are we telling these stories to educate our non-Indigenous visitors? The reinterpretation of this floor is meant to center Indigenous perspectives, but at what point does it re-traumatize our Indigenous visitors? So just food for thought for future discussion. Still, a positive response to non-museum perspectives is in several of our 2021 reinstallations inspired a similar approach in the 3 collections reinstalled in the other building, which opened just in May this year. In our Arts of Africa gallery, the team created a moment about Black hair around the museum's collection of hair picks, which is the photo on the left. The objects and large environmental video, which is up top, are from the African continent, and 3 of the interpretive components are from diasporic voices. A wall quote from Solange Knowles, a narrated video about Black hair, and a community label written by Leslie Herod, a Colorado state representative and one of the main sponsors of the Crown Act, which is a law protecting workers and students from race-based hair discrimination. On the right, our modern and contemporary galleries adjacent to the Arts of Africa. Our interpretive specialists collaborated with staff and volunteers across all departments of the museum to create staff picks labels. It was a way for staff from security to collection services to facilities to marketing and more to participate in the reinstallation and to offer their own stories to the public about impactful objects to get a wider view than solely one from a curatorial or interpretive perspective. And incidentally, this weekend, we're gathering data about a study we're doing on multiple voices and how those affect visitors. So I'm happy to share that once we get the results in a few weeks. So finally, I just want to say that Of course, there are many kinds of internal and external collaboration that I didn't cover, of course. And I only gave you a glimpse into a couple of our permanent collections. But to us at the Dam, the benefits of our collaborative staff team approach have been evident for decades, which is why it has stuck. New ways of looking and thinking emerge through this process, as do inclusive visitor-centered approach and a working environment of trust and respect. As for collaborating with artists, advisors, other staff, volunteers, community members, we can see benefits from the 2022 visitor studies, and remarks such as those that you see on the screen give us a good indication that although our process wasn't perfect, our approach to these reinstallations of looking both within and outside of ourselves to get at a shared humanity experience was noticed and appreciated by visitors. Thanks.
Welcome back. And welcome back our virtual attendees. My name is Paula Reich. I am the manager of gallery interpretation and learning here at the museum, and I'm delighted to kick off this second session of the symposium. We had a fantastic start this morning. Thank you again, Caroline, Amelia, and Stefania. Very inspiring. First, again, I'll remind everyone that we will be holding questions until both speakers have presented, and we'll have the same situation with the microphones, and please wait for the mic to come to you before asking your question. Our first speaker of session 2 is Clarissa Esguerra. She's the curator of costume and textiles at Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where she recently co-curated Lee Alexander McQueen, Mind Mythos Muse. And she's going to talk to us about fashioning perspectives, encouraging new meanings through cross-departmental display.
Thank you. And wow, what an inspiring morning already. I'm so pleased to be part of this, and I look forward to the rest of the day. So I'll be speaking from the perspective of a costume and textile curator. The collecting and display of costume and textiles within an art museum, though not universal, is not new. In fact, collecting objects made of cloth for the body or the home has been part of institutional collecting practices for centuries. This makes sense, as textiles are one of the most portable luxuries collected in the ancient world. Often these fabrics, which symbolize status, sophistication, and worldliness, carried within them new and exciting meanings, techniques, materials, and aesthetics of the societies from which they came. And clearly, not all art museums collect and show textiles or clothing, but as a specialist and a curator at an institution that does, I have found firsthand the benefits of displaying and interpreting these kinds of objects alongside the mediums we more commonly associate with art spaces, painting, sculpture, and works on paper. Oftentimes, new meanings can be made when works of art of differing mediums or from different time periods or places are shown together, as we saw already this morning. However, for this integration of different types of art to work successfully, collaboration is essential, and a diversity of expertise, experiences, and ways of seeing art from both within and outside the museum at equal seats at the planning table. In this session, I will briefly discuss the medium of costume and textiles and its place within an art museum. I'll also share my own personal experiences at LACMA and how my colleagues and I endeavor to be more collaborative and cross-departmental in display, primarily drawing from my most recent exhibition, Lee Alexander McQueen, Mind Mythos Muse. This talk will describe the process of organizing this permanent collection show through curatorial collaboration, the challenges along the way, and how showing various forms of art outside of their typical context can encourage new perspectives and meanings. These lessons served as a precursor to the current planning and collaborative work underway for LACMA's reinstallation of our permanent galleries, now being built as I speak. LACMA's costume and textile collection is in itself encyclopedic, with pieces that document thousands of years of global textile practices, and where, for example, we could acquire fashion off the runway, as well as 19th century Central Asian ikat robes within the same year. As a result, our collection can easily integrate within thematic displays. In the past, my department had light-sensitive rotations within permanent galleries, where the textiles were largely the only objects that changed. Despite this, dress and textile art exhibitions are predominantly curated separately from other kinds of art. This is not to say that these types of exhibitions do not have merit. On the contrary, they do, especially as isolating works by medium shows the visitor and allows them to contemplate the process of making these objects. But it is far rarer to find thematic exhibitions that merge these objects with non-fashion and textile works, most especially in an equitable way. In the past, when our works were shown in non-costume and textile displays, these objects tended to be more supplementary, as they often help to create variety in the space and allow viewers to see, for example, what an extant gown might look like as depicted on the wall. This approach can sometimes present a hierarchy, either intentionally or not, between the art on the wall and the fashion on the platform, terms typically used separately and rarely referencing each other. Despite this tendency, there are also examples where fashion or textiles are incorporated into thematic exhibitions where effort was made to show the various works in equal dialogue, where the pairings contribute and strengthen each other. The commonality of these diverse shows is that the organizing curator collaborated with specialists of objects outside their expertise and brought them on as advisors, consultants, and sounding boards. And this model of reaching out and listening is one I tried to follow in my recent exhibition. In 2018, my colleague and co-curator Michaela Hansen and I began to organize Lee Alexander McQueen, my Mythos Muse, with the expressed goal of showing the fashion designer Alexander McQueen's work in equal dialogue with non-fashion works. The reason for this approach is that we wanted to show fashion as art and McQueen as an artist, as his practice in creating his cinematic runway collections is really no different than any artist trying to make sense of the world. It is only that his medium is fashion. This permanent collection exhibition was inspired by a substantial donation by Los Angeles native Regina J. Drucker. For over 20 years, she collected McQueen, among other notable fashion designers, but very rarely wore these works because she collected them as art. Her contribution to the museum allowed LACMA to have the largest collection of McQueen within a North American public institution, and my Mythos Muse was a celebration of that gift. Exploring imagination, artistic process, and innovation, the exhibition examines the interdisciplinary impulse that defined the designer's career. As McQueen's sources of inspiration ranged time, place, and medium, we thought it only fitting to draw from LACMA's encyclopedic collection, which also houses works ranging time, place, and medium. The timing of organizing this exhibition was crucial as well, because as we develop the checklist, we were also preparing to move our permanent collections off-site for the construction of a new building dedicated to the permanent collection, designed by architect Peter Zumthor. As a result of the temporary closing of our permanent galleries, Michaela and I could essentially curate from almost all of the permanent collection. Even more rewarding, we had the support of our curatorial colleagues, especially as they wanted to have their works from their department on display during this time. We welcomed this camaraderie and openness to share exhibition space between curatorial disciplines, something that wasn't always the case. In developing the checklist, we first pre-selected fashions that could visually represent a storyline of a McQueen collection, teasing out sources of inspiration in his work using our knowledge of textile history and garment construction. Next, we searched our database for objects that could be placed in dialogue with the fashion, looking specifically at pieces that could visually support each other and create new meanings in their pairings. Following this preliminary list of objects, we presented the exhibition concept and our initial non-fashion textile selections with representative curatorial departments. And here we asked for guidance and for further recommendation, as well as inviting them into deeper discussion about our pairings. If further research was needed, we asked for advice in finding outside points of view. Michaela and I repeated this process for each thematic grouping in the exhibition and met with almost every curatorial department in the museum. Particular to our exhibition is the issue of cultural appropriation in fashion. During McQueen's career designing in the 1990s until his death in 2010, the practice of drawing inspiration from outside one's own culture was not only common among fashion designers, but considered a celebration of rapid globalization that characterized that era, a time when postmodernism was challenging the ideals of modernism, in particular, its assumptions about universal principles and aesthetics. Cultural cross-pollination is not new and has occurred for centuries. The transmission of sharing ideas and traditions is a cornerstone of dress and art history. However, in both contemporary and historic fashion, it can be challenging to immediately differentiate superficial appropriation for commercial gain from exchanges as a mode of appreciation or storytelling rooted in research. We dealt with this by breaking up McQueen's collections, examining them on a case-by-case basis through discussion and contextualization. For the McQueen collections where we needed more perspective beyond our immediate advisors, Michaela and I opened up those conversations to a broader group within the museum for fuller feedback. Although planning of this multidisciplinary project began before the pandemic, the bulk of the research and writing occurred just before and during the social uprisings in response to the death of George Floyd and the necessary reckoning with the effects of colonization and globalization. With a deep need by many of the staff to do something actionable in our work, LACMA's already established curatorial forum, composed of the museum's curatorial and conservation departments, began a curatorial colloquium, and this is the first slide from that presentation. This virtual meeting was a space where curators were invited to openly and respectfully discuss topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in projects that were in process to hopefully encourage more mindful display and interpretation of our collections. Michaela and I were the first presenters of the colloquium, a daunting task and vulnerable position to be in, but one that was necessary and extremely rewarding. For this presentation, we invited members of the curatorial forum, as well as education, publication, exhibitions, and collections management. We presented these case studies from our checklists and asked for advice for feedback, which came through moderated discussion that encouraged engagement from multiple voices, and not just heads of departments, but from junior staff, newly graduated curatorial fellows, administrators, and interns. Conversations and ideas were shared beyond the presentation as well, through personal emails, phone calls, and meetings with colleagues to discuss ideas more privately and thoroughly. These robust discussions reiterated to Michaela and me that the context and intention of McQueen's designs were perhaps now more crucial than ever to acknowledge in the interpretation of his body of work. The following are 3 case studies we shared at the colloquium, as well as how we ultimately displayed and interpreted the objects. The inception of Mythos Muse began with this dress from McQueen's Fall/Winter 2003-04 collection Scanners. Imagine looking at this piece on its own and appreciating its dynamic pattern, graphic trim, and sharp cut, not knowing that in this collection, McQueen was telling a story about migration, conveying a journey across Siberia and Tibet destined for Japan. Upon understanding McQueen's storyline, Michaela identified this motif of interlocking octagons and floral medallions as one imported to Tibet from China. In Tibet, the pattern is identified by the term of brocade design, kati-rimo. The design is also seen, like other motifs derived from Chinese textiles, in Tibetan material culture such as knotted rugs or painted wooden trunks. And in consulting with the Department of South and Southeast Asian Art, we confirmed that we had a 17th century Tibetan trunk and Buddhist temple hangings with this very same motif. Although McQueen was not a textile scholar, Scanners affords a unique lens through which to consider notable cultural exchanges such as the proliferation of Buddhism, which the designer practiced, ingrained into textile history. Completing its west to east pilgrimage, an kimono-inspired jacket displays another of McQueen's interpretations of kati-rimo. Here, woven as one of multiple discrete patterns within a single textile design. In Japan, this design, introduced via imported Chinese silks, is called shoko. As Buddhism was embraced, shoko and its variations were also incorporated into Japanese Buddhist practice. And the jacket's trompe-l'oeil piecing suggests Buddhist patchworking methods observed in Japanese priest mantles or kesa like this one. To fully tell this story, Michaela and I collaborated with specialists of Buddhism and textiles of China and Japan, which brought debate about the origins and transmission of the affirmation pattern in particular. We invited specialists outside the museum with an even greater expertise in the Silk Road and the history of this kati-rimo and shoko pattern. The answer was not definitive, but ultimately, the reimagination of this pattern within China and its international resonance abroad demonstrates the natural inclination to borrow across cultures and time periods so often revealed by textile history. This Kess's Shoko pattern variation exemplifies the inherent reinvention of globally transmitted motifs over time, a legacy that fashion designers such as McQueen tap into when they reimagine historical textiles in contemporary ways. McQueen's Spring-Summer 2000 Eye collection was initially inspired by Turkish music overheard in a cab, as well as the Arab community in London, combining body-conscious and bondage-style Western fashion and interpretations of cultural and religious dress traditionally associated with the diverse regions, including the former Ottoman Empire, contemporary Turkey, and the Persian Gulf. Controversial then and now, we first began to unpack Eye with our colleagues in the Art of the Middle East department. We showed them the McQueen pieces we had in our collection, as well as images of the controversial runway, where models, sometimes clad in yashmak face coverings, walked a catwalk that looked covered in black oil. The runway presentation felt like a clear case of appropriation and conflation of many cultures. And we asked, is it even appropriate to show this? The department's advice to us was that yes, this was an example of appropriation, but we could use this opportunity to discuss it by demonstrating that appropriation works in many directions and by including key Middle Eastern objects that offer a counter-narrative. For example, this liturgical veil was woven in Turkey during the second half of the 16th century, featuring an Ottoman red and gold color palette with a distinctive scrolling leaf pattern. It was later adopted and remade after 1600 by an East Orthodox church, as evidenced by the distinct Christian cross at the center. The design is echoed in a miniskirt of a McQueen look that also features a red and white stripe that is reminiscent of Ottoman silks that became fashionable in Europe during the 18th century. Another example featuring coins with a faux Arabic inscription of McQueen's name references Islamic calligraphy traditions. These coin embellishments elicit comparison with so-called money hats traditionally worn by Palestinian brides on their wedding day, demonstrating the young woman's personal wealth. The hats are adorned mostly with collected Habsburg coins rather than Ottoman ones. The faux McQueen coins adorning the bare midriff of the red ensemble also evoke belly dancing. Costumes worn in modern cabarets as captured by Egyptian artist Yusuf Nabil in this photographic work, Natasha Atlas, Cairo 2000, an inclusion suggested by curator and department head Linda Komroff. Eye connects McQueen to the legacy of Turkey, the 18th century Western European fashion for imitating the beauty of Turkish culture, but in such a way that idealized reality or conveyed fantasy. Made the same year as the Eye collection, Nabil's portrait centers on the performer and belly dancer Natasha Atlas, known for her fusion of Arabic, North African, and Western electronic music. Linda explains that Nabil's portrait harkens back to the glamorous photography of mid-20th century Cairo. When Nabil met the singer, he knew instantly he wanted to photograph her in a kind of oriental tableau as a traditional belly dancer, inspired by the classical Egyptian movies he watched on television while growing up in Cairo. Here, the figure is cropped just below the shoulders, like a film close-up. But Atlas is not the woman trapped in the male gaze implicit in the Western fantasy of the Middle East, which presupposes a state of feminine vulnerability and passivity. Rather, she is formidable, with a tense energy and toned physique required of a dancer, both aware and in control of her sexuality. In contrast to the Orientalist trope of the belly dancer, for Nabil, she activates both a remembered and an imagined memory of Egypt, of home. Since its premiere, Eye has often been interpreted as making a statement regarding practices around concealing and revealing women's bodies. But in this reading, Eye offers no clear commentary on women's agency. So for the final case study, the widows of Culloden from fall-winter 2006 and 7 mined McQueen's Scottish ancestry and condemned British violent colonial history, particularly the brutal 1746 Battle of Culloden. The collection's romantic silhouettes and refined construction draw upon the McQueen clan tartan and Scotland's natural landscape. Though tartans have been part of the fashionable dress since the Highland Romantic revival of the 19th century, Here, their use references a place that Queen felt was, quote, harsh and cold and bitter. There's nothing romantic about Scotland's history. What the British did there was nothing short of genocide. My next slide may be triggering, so I warn you. This complicated history extends into North America with John Singleton Copley's portrait of Hugh Montgomery. In 1780, at the time this portrait was painted, it was forbidden to wear Scottish tartan and English dress unless one was serving in the British military. Scotsman Hugh Montgomery is portrayed here commanding a British battalion, wearing traditional attire. His clan tartan reflects at once his Scottish heritage and the recent military expansion of the British Empire of the Scottish Isles after the Battle of Culloden. Montgomery stands in the victorious classical pose of the Apollo Belvedere above a group of fallen Salagi or Cherokee amid an ambush. However, this portrait does not tell the truth. Although Montgomery fought for the British in the colonies, he did not take part in the battle depicted here, which occurred in 1760, 20 years prior to the execution of this painting. More significantly, the Cherokee did not capitulate in the battle, as John Singleton Copley's painting suggests. A few weeks after Britain's attack, the Cherokee prevailed, and the European troops retreated from the area. And such images of conquest inevitably contribute to the erasure of those portrayed as the defeated, generating an assumption that once the depicted battle was lost, these groups of peoples disappeared. But a single flattering portrait come history painting does not constitute abiding truth. The British went on to lose the American Revolutionary War, as we all know. The Cherokee Nation would become the largest tribe in the territory known as the United States, and as of this writing in Scotland, a significant political movement for independence from the United Kingdom persists. The inclusion of this monumental painting, considered a masterwork in our collection, was controversial. Prior to our exhibition, the interpretation of the painting as propaganda was not on the label. Michaela and I were extremely grateful to have the support of our curator and department head of European and American art, Linda Lembeck, who wrote about this painting in depth for our catalog, and from which I just quoted. However, we also had colleagues that strongly advised us not to include the Copley, for such a controversial piece does not belong in a fashion exhibition. After many hard-fought discussions, we succeeded in incorporating the painting because this case is an illustration of how the meaning of seemingly disparate objects changes when they are together. McQueen's use of tartan to reclaim Scottish identity in this collection is a clear counter-narrative to the use of the tartan in the painting. However, it was abundantly clear that a counter-narrative from the Indigenous perspective must also be presented in the display of this work. After consulting many colleagues and many discussions, we reached out to performance artist, activist, and artistic director of Native Voices at the Autry, Delana Studi, Cherokee, who recommended sharing a reading from Nancy Ward within the exhibition. Nancy Ward was an advocate for a peaceful coexistence between the Cherokee and European Americans, representing her people in political negotiations between the nations and colonists throughout her life. Ward was also a contemporary of John Singleton Copley, both born in 1738. Excerpts from Ward's powerful letter from 1817 in a meeting with the Cherokee Council, strongly urging members to discontinue sales of their homelands to recent settlers, was read by Delana Studi and included in the exhibition near the painting, as well as online. In addition to this in-gallery content, our excellent exhibitions department commissioned Native Voices, the only equity theater in the country dedicated to developing, producing new plays by Native artists, to further examine and respond to the Copley painting through a series of newly developed plays. The plays, drawing upon humor, storytelling, and Indigenous experience, deconstructs the legacy of historical whitewashing that has been woven into our nation's history and present reality, and were performed free of charge to visitors following a Q&A with the cast. So in conclusion, these stories of collaboration are just a few that helped inform the diverse checklist of this exhibition. While acknowledging that there is much more that can be done in a museum space, I hope my sharing of the evolution of displaying and interpreting McQueen's work anew highlights the importance of collaboration across disciplines and specialties, as we've already seen, and I'm sure we'll continue to see today. As my curatorial colleagues and I are now tasked with the reinterpretation of our encyclopedic collection for upcoming permanent galleries, we are each engaging in similar style discussions, spanning our diverse works, including costume and textiles, to try to show a more interconnected world with a shared appreciation of beauty and creativity. And I look forward to taking away a lot that I learned today as part of that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Excuse me. Thank you, Larissa. That was really great. I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, who is Toledo Museum of Art's own Diane Wright. She's a senior curator of glass and contemporary craft at TMA, where she's been since 2017, and is getting ready to open an exciting exhibition at TMA next month titled Beth Lipman Regift. She's going to talk to us about Toledo Museum of Art's own journey towards a full reinstallation in her presentation, TMA Through the Kaleidoscope.
Hello, welcome. Thank you, Clarissa, for an excellent talk. Thank you, all of you so far, for what you've shared and what you will share. Thank you for joining us in person and remotely. We know that your time and your resources and your energy are really valuable, and appreciate that you chose to participate here in this critical dialogue about the reinstallation of art collections in museums in the 21st century. And to my colleagues, I especially want to say thank you for all of the conversations that have led up to this point, and for trusting me to represent our collective voice, which primarily in this presentation is coming from the curatorial department. It's such a great pleasure to host you here in the Glass Pavilion, a purpose-built structure that was created to showcase a historic collection and studio art making practices with glass. This material plays a significant role in the identity of this museum. Our founders, the Libbies, had a glass company, and thanks to their resources, which they used, we have a museum here that was chartered and founded in 1901. So we're here because the Toledo Museum of Art is planning a comprehensive reinstallation of its collection for the first time, looking at the campus holistically, to include 90,000 square feet of galleries in the 1912 neoclassical building designed by Edward Green, and 10,000 square feet in the 2000 Sana designed glass pavilion, and the Georgia and David K. Wells sculpture garden, all of which are part of a 37-acre campus. What I want to share with you today is some of the things that we've done so far, about 2 years into what will be about a 5.5 year journey. Our ideas, but really also a lot of the practicalities, because this is what we've been looking for and seeking in our conversations, a lot of the basics of how to get started and move forward. Our project is grounded in a set of institutional values: diversity, community, innovation, and trust. And it aims to establish relationships across time, media, cultures, geographies, and to demonstrate the interconnectedness among works of art and peoples. All of this while improving and strengthening internal museum structures to ensure our future success. So one might think of a reinstallation project like a kaleidoscope of sorts, an instrument, or galleries in our case, that focuses on art in a way that allows for a diversity of perspectives. Something that both we and our communities are really ready for. Although our museum-wide reinstallation is the capstone project of a 5-year strategic plan, the origins have felt quite organic to us, in large part due to the luxury of time and the order of events. In recent years, conversations have percolated through our offices and hallways amongst curatorial, but also certainly in collections, education, exhibitions, belonging, development, and other departments that scrutinize the roles and responsibilities of museums in our society and their ability to act as change agents. These have intensified with strong social currents and events, a global pandemic, Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements, the impacts of climate change, and so on, are all at the forefront of our discussions. We want our institution to reflect what we're thinking and feeling, our values and our concerns. We have a solid history at TMA that we are very proud of. Yet in 122 years, there have also been so many opportunities for variation, change, even some discontinuity. And in 2023, we find ourselves in a moment where we ask ourselves and really demand of ourselves a refocusing and clarification of our strategy for display. In 2020 and 2021, TMA experienced major non-pandemic related staffing changes in leadership at the director level and on the curatorial team. Adam Levine joined TMA as the Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Livy director in April of 2020, followed by our long-term colleague, Andrea Gardner, taking on the role of head of curatorial affairs along with collections. A strong sentiment for change amongst colleagues blended with opportunities that Adam brought to the museum and conversations about reinstallation naturally led to one about how we would build a staff to accomplish such a monumental project. In the following 2 years, we invested heavily in constructing a curatorial department that today includes some pretty amazing people. Jessica Hong in Modern and Contemporary, Erin Corrales-Diaz, the first curator in 50 years at the TMA dedicated to American art, and Robert Schindler in European. I joined this team in 2017 to work with glass collection, decorative arts, and more recently, contemporary craft. This growth of the curatorial team was initially meant to happen more gradually over the course of 5 years, but with a great deal of support from the director, executive team, and board, we continued to grow more quickly. We brought on Duffy Maddox for curatorial support, research associates, Willow Gritzmaker in American, Shahan Mullen in Modern and Contemporary came, with 2 more research associates coming on imminently. We needed help with smaller collection areas that have rarely, or if ever, had a dedicated curator. So we looked to a consulting curator model. Carlos Picon for Ancient Art helped us, Christine Starkman in Asian art, and Lanisa Kitchener with African art, and most recently, Joanna Minich for Native American. We also have curatorial support, which I can't underestimate the value of, from our leadership fellows, Sophie Ong and Ahmad Rafi. The museum was growing in other departments as well, laying its foundation for what was to come. I would also note that as we were building this team, the curatorial areas and oversight were reconsidered in terms of what would work for the reinstallation. Now they are organized mostly around geography rather than media, with the exception of glass. As you look at the screen with a lot of names on it and small text, I can tell you that there are 15 names on here with 2 placeholders. Only 3 of these people were here in 2020 as we started this conversation. So we really had an amazing opportunity to build a team that would come in knowing that this project was at hand and coming in all really with the same kind of motivation and values and ideas. Not incidentally, these changes came with a more evolved curatorial culture, one that emphasizes a dominant spirit of collaboration. We have worked very hard here to break down curatorial silos, changing both perspective and behavior, moving away from what I have done and what is mine to what we are doing together. On the cusp of all of this was a very early curatorial effort to write a collective collecting strategy at the request of our then interim director, John Stanley. Rather than assembling a stack of individual approaches, however, we focused on a single viewpoint, which speaks for the entire department. This work is now critical to the present moment, as we are making decisions about acquisitions with the reinstallation in mind. So our approach to reinstall is in line with our collecting strategy and vice versa. Both in turn then look to our institutional vision. to broaden the narrative of art history. We are using that phrase a lot these days here at TMA, as I imagine many of you are as well. And yet saying it with frequency seems to continue to reinforce both our direction and our goal. How, though, does one actually begin to define this phrase? I have a couple of examples. TMA has a collection of about 24,000 works of art that span 4,000 years of history, and yet contains only 1% female representation. There is definitely inequity in museums. We all know that. It's pervasive, not just amongst women, but for Brown and Black artists, their LGBTQI community, and many, many more. This is something that we're very aware of and focused on. In addition to thinking about issues of inclusivity, we've discussed aspects of this broadening of the narrative in an external sense, meaning what we are sharing out with people to include representation, which is about what you purchase, but also very much about what you display. As changing the display allows you to change the balance of voices in a much more dramatic way, much faster than you can actually change the demographics of the entire collection. We've talked about a dedication to accessibility, which is about who gets access, from scholars to school children, what types of learning we provide, what language we choose, and the physical elements that define access built into gallery spaces and buildings. There's also the internal broadening, which is the museum structure and the culture of the institution. As we're building the curatorial team, we also began to convene regularly amongst ourselves and with our leadership to sketch out high-level ideas. We made the time to hire staff, build consensus among ourselves and with leadership, and have many philosophical conversations about what a reinstallation means in and for Toledo at this particular time in history. This phrase, I think, is a little bit like painting a room in your house. This phase of the work, I should say. The prep work is hard and it takes a long time. Nobody really wants to spackle the holes and use the primer. It slows down the process. But taking these steps also dramatically improves the final result, as well as the rest of the experience. In terms of time right now, we're about 34% into this project, but we are not nearly as far along in terms of the collection work that we need to do. So masking off the trim, so to speak, has helped us make organic and solid decisions and gives us a very clear path forward for the next 4 years. Another very early effort that the curatorial team made was to make appointments with key staff around the museum with the goal of not only learning and understanding more about our institutional history, but to share out our early thoughts on the project and to find out from our colleagues what it might mean to them in their departments as well. We discovered pretty quickly that the language we were using didn't always reflect our new vision. It's pretty easy to pick up institutional jargon and continue that forward. For example, we often use the terms main building and GP, names which denote hierarchy and ambiguity. This is an image that I took from our master plan on which you can see the main building is identified. TMA staff and visitors alike struggle with an imposing 4-lane highway called Monroe Street that runs between these two buildings. We realize that we need to project outward what we want our visitors to internalize. Definitely not hierarchies and ambiguity. When I came on board and I started hearing the term GP, my first reaction was that it was a very clinical term. And I wanted to help change that. We also wanted to help visitors to help realize that this road is not actually an insurmountable object, or insurmountable. In fact, it is totally worth crossing the street, no matter which way you're headed. So we're self-correcting in our language. The main building is the Edward Green building, because of course that building does have an architect. The GP is increasingly the glass pavilion or the sauna building. This same concept applies to how we are talking about the collection. Art is not static, neither are museums. We have a collection that changes frequently, whether it's new acquisitions or how we write about it, or what we put on display, or what we put into storage. Dropping the term permanent from the description helps us convey this more clearly to both ourselves and our audiences. At the same time we're doing all of this internal work, we also began to look outward to the state of museums, to you. Curators and, importantly, museums from across the institution have been out to see more than 160 museums, historic houses, and art spaces in the last 2 years, mostly in the United States, but also internationally, finding inspiration and getting advice from all of you. We are immensely appreciative, not only of the hospitality that has been shown to us, but all of the honest and frank conversations that we've had with you. These engagements have been so enlightening and honestly, really one of the most joyful parts of this work so far. Over the last 2 years, we've also held periodic day-long intensives. We've built continuity of thought with the regular cadence of conversation that's helped us really gain momentum. During these long sessions, we've debated, discussed, advocated for different approaches to an overall collection layout. And when I say this, this group was primarily at this point curators and Andrea, as our head of the department. We talked about geographical, thematic, chronological, maybe a mixture of all three. We actually spent the better part of a year having this conversation and conversations. So we recently in June made the first major decision, project decision, a significant step forward with us. We are using chronology as our primary approach. One of the exercises that helped us get to this point was to study over and over again our gallery maps, repeatedly drawing out variations of our ideal installation. This was both collective and individual work. Often we would take these home, write on them, bring them back, and review them together, which I would say is one of the most fascinating aspects to figure out what we would actually come up with when they're not all in the room together. This spring, the curatorial team drafted 2 proposals that began to provide some specificity of gallery layout for each building. These were then presented to Adam with pros and cons of each, and a version was finalized in June. So we have an approach, we have a general layout. Another critical decision, which is something that we agreed on kind of at the very beginning and all along the way, is that we will fully integrate 2D and 3D works into all the galleries. There are some galleries in the Green Building now that accomplish this beautifully, thanks to my colleagues that have done such wonderful reinstallations recently. Erin and Jessica and Lanisa have done really incredible work so far. And the display in the glass pavilion, you'll notice, is almost entirely devoted right now to one medium. When it was built in 2006, the glass pavilion was meant to showcase this rather singular collection, which is actually a third of the overall collection here, while also providing state-of-the-art glassmaking studios. We've really achieved that goal. And before the new installation opens, this space will be 20 years old. So the future of the glass pavilion is to show special exhibitions, some collection installation, and artist commissions, while remaining a space for our glassmaking facilities and residencies and special events such as this one. The nature of TMA's collection still very much supports and encourages geographies, some well-established, others that are growing. And we will also use thematic discussion as a way to pause and transition, moving visitors from one point in time to the other. Displaying works together in this way, we expect to find new, even surprising relationships and stories within the collection that haven't been told because we historically separated them almost entirely by geography, medium, or some other classification. Chronology and time are complex constructs, and we now are asking ourselves, how will we both tether ourselves to it for the sake of a unifying approach, while also finding a new pathway to explore. We each have an ongoing relationship to time, impacted by a variety of forces, as broad as culture and as narrow as our individual perspectives. Glenn Adamson, a scholar and great craft advocate, suggests that we consider time as social phenomenon, a true multiplicity, each person, artwork, artist, place, and culture, keeping their own rhythm. If you listen to music, and I imagine you all do, you know that complicated rhythms combine in an astonishing and unexpected ways, which is what draws us to it and why we love it so much. This chronological and integrated approach will most certainly take longer and demand more compromise on the part of each curator. But collaboration has the potential for compelling results. Early on, we began what we called cross-training sessions, where we spent time in galleries together, teaching each other about our respective specialties in order to make these collaborative conversations more effective. This, in turn, led to collection assessments that were written, required of each curator, pushing us to delve deeper into the database for collecting and object histories. These assessments were then shared out by each curator at lunchtime presentations that were open to the entire staff, generating a great deal of enthusiasm for not only the collection across departments, but also further opening the reinstallation conversation to the rest of the museum. At TMA, we are using a distributed or shared agile leadership model that originates outside of the museum sector. This structure creates cross-departmental teams and spreads responsibilities more broadly amongst staff, rather than concentrating it within a few people at the executive level. Work is divided into projects with teams and leaders for each. For example, to date, we've had a single team meeting together, having these really broad conversations that I've shared with you, determining an approach and a layout for the reinstallation. The number of people involved is naturally growing as the project gets defined, the conversations are narrowing and becoming more granular. This would be unwieldy now as one team. Starting in July, we have 5 teams that have been built for the reinstallation, each with its own lead and member of curatorial on each team. These include layout and design, interpretation strategy, building analysis and cost estimation, communications and community engagement, and fundraising strategy. Another aspect of internal structure that has proven vital includes relying on a contractor or long-term temporary position to fill needs rather than adding the work to the already full plate of our full-time employees. I have 2 examples for you. We hired an external grant writer to focus solely on the reinstallation project, who ended up providing critical help on developing a timeline for us. Secondly, we hired a project manager. Our colleague, Crystal Phelps, who was previously in another department at TMA, joined the curatorial department to manage us through this massive endeavor, giving curators much needed time for collection research and writing rather than having them double up on curatorial and project management duties. We're taking further advantage of this early planning time to set up a series of experiments, testing a variety of ideas and strategies. Expanding Horizons, the evolving character of a nation, curated by Aaron Corrales-Diaz with interpretation led by Paula Reich, uses 80 works from the American collection to explore display of an underutilized American collection with new modes of interpretation. The exhibition has built in real-time visitor feedback through analog and digital channels. TMA staff held 3 focus groups responding to thematic content during the exhibition development. And these focus group participants will return during the run of show for follow-up conversations. We also received a grant from the Luce Foundation to partner with the Oakland Museum for mentorship on best practices in this area. 2 more installations coming by our consulting curators are now on view or about to be. Last night, we opened Africa Unmasked, The Art of the Continent Across Time and Space by Lanisa Kitchener, showing TMA's long history of collecting African art and its current commitment. This is the first time the new acquisition by Wageshi Mutu is on view. We're eagerly anticipating Christine Starkman's rethinking of the Asian collection, which will open in the gallery opposite Africa Unmasked on the other side of the atrium in spring 2024. Joanna Minich, who recently joined us to work on Native American, is collaborating with Aaron on expanding horizons, setting up rotations throughout the run of the show. In order to make room for the Asian collection installation that Christine will do, the Impressionist paintings will come here, making that journey across Monroe Street to the Glass Pavilion. There are two noteworthy strategies here. One is that the installations for African and Asian are in a place of prominence at the top of the staircases. Both of these collections have been off view for quite a few years. At the same time, a group of beloved paintings will hopefully draw visitors to the Glass Pavilion. With practice, we hope they will experience the Glass Pavilion with the same ease that they access the Green Building, perhaps even more so. And lastly, from 2025 on, special exhibitions will also shift to this building with similar goals in mind, which will give us valuable time to offline those galleries in the Green Building for physical renovation and reinstallation. The Green Building is scheduled to reopen in spring of 2027 and the Glass Pavilion in fall of that same year, at which point we will call the project finished. So in June, just last month, TMA issued an RFQ looking for qualifications from designers. This closes on September 1st, so there's still lots of time for you designers out there. And we expect to have a designer chosen by the end of the year. And this wonderful symposium comes at an interesting juncture for us. We know what direction we're headed, with room still and flexibility for critical assessment and realignment where necessary. So our next steps include developing synergies and themes across collecting areas with the goal of having our checklists at the gallery level complete by the end of this year. Now, like an object that allows for complex and myriad ways of seeing, each of us will go about our reinstallations in many different ways. Inventor David Brewster named his kaleidoscope from the Greek words beautiful image viewer. Peering into this instrument for me is like walking through the door of a museum. Even though we are looking through the same aperture or entering the same front door, we have different experiences. Perhaps depending on the condition of light that day, maybe the angle of our hand that we're holding our kaleidoscope, or just how we experience color and pattern. As museum professionals, we are focused on content, structure, and creating connections, yet it is the individual human engagement with our museums that is what turns this into something truly extraordinary. In making efforts to get things right, we will inevitably get things wrong too. My hope is that this will not inhibit us from taking risks, finding our collective and our individual voices, and using the most creativity that we can muster, being true to who we are as museum professionals and institutions to connect art and people. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome both our virtual and in-person attendees back to the final portion of our symposium this afternoon. My name is Willow Gritzmaker, and I'm the Research Associate of American Art here at the Toledo Museum of Art. I have been given the opportunity to introduce our final group of speakers, beginning with Taylor Acosta, the Chief Curator and Willis A. Strauss Curator of European Art at the Joslin Art Museum, where she oversees the curatorial and collections departments. She and the others working at the Joslin are taking part in an ongoing renovation and reinstallation of their collection. Today, she will be presenting on this topic during her talk, Evolving Joslin, Goals, Processes, and Strategies for Reinstalling the Permanent Collection.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the kind introduction. I want to extend my thanks to our Toledo Museum of Art hosts for convening this symposium and for creating space for such productive conversations. I also want to thank my team at Joslin Art Museum for your collaboration on our museum's reinstallation project, for your assistance in putting this presentation together, and for trusting me to represent our work. Joslin Art Museum is in the midst of an ambitious expansion and transformation, which includes the construction of the new Rhonda and Howard Hawks Pavilion, renovation of the existing landmark buildings, and reconfiguration of the museum's campus. The Joslin Memorial, the name by which Joslin Art Museum was known until 1950, opened in 1931. An extraordinary Art Deco building featuring a concert hall surrounded by art galleries, the museum was founder Sarah Joslin's gift to the people of Omaha in memory of her husband George, founder of the Western Newspaper Union. Gifts from individual collectors and from Omaha's two main art societies form the basis of the museum's collection. A substantial endowment bequeathed by Sarah Joslin in 1940 supported the purchase of European Old Master paintings. In the succeeding years, the collection grew and diversified. So too did the ambitions of the museum. A 1994 expansion was designed by Norman Foster, his first commission in the United States. The Walter and Suzanne Scott Pavilion added 14,000 square feet of gallery space, which accommodated the museum's post-war and contemporary art collection, as well as special exhibitions. The Rhonda and Howard Hawks Pavilion will expand the museum's vision for public access to the arts. Designed by Snowhetta, in partnership with Omaha-based Allie Pointer Maquetto, the new building will merge with the existing structures, constituting a physical transformation and setting the stage for a programmatic one. The 42,000 square foot Hawks Pavilion adds 16,000 square feet of gallery space, including dedicated galleries for works on paper and media. The building will afford greater access to contemporary art, as well as to a landmark collection gift, the Philip G. Schrager Collection. This construction project has occasioned the first complete reinstallation of the permanent collection since the museum's opening in 1931. For curators, this is perhaps a once-in-a-career opportunity. When the museum reopens in the summer of 2024, the permanent collection will be displayed across 3 buildings and a sculpture garden. The museum closed to the public in May 2022, and a few initiatives leading up to and just following the closure have greatly informed the planning for the reinstallation. The first was an exhibition organized in 2021 on the occasion of the museum's 90th anniversary. It featured a graphic timeline of the museum's history and collection highlights installed in the order in which they were acquired. Co-curated by the 3 curators then on staff, this was an opportunity to work collaboratively and to think across collections, and it was perhaps the only time the Rembrandt and the Pollock would be displayed side by side. The museum also pursued 3 major initiatives that allowed us to share our collection during closure, and for our team to learn from seeing the works in new contexts, displayed and interpreted by colleagues at partner institutions. We participated in the first Art Bridges Collection Loan Program, an initiative of the Art Bridges Foundation. 50 artworks from the American and contemporary collections were lent to 4 museums across the country: Portland Museum of Art in Maine, Figge Art Museum in Davenport, Iowa, Hudson River Museum in Yonkers, New York, and the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, Florida.
We organized an exhibition of 52 European paintings, which traveled to the Taubman Museum of Art in Roanoke and the Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa. And a selection of ancient Greek pottery was lent to the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City and displayed in a special installation. A few other projects provide important context for our forthcoming reinstallation. The Joslin's participation in the second cohort of the Museum Partners for Social Justice, an initiative of the Henry Luce Foundation, supports our ongoing efforts to develop a framework for meaningful and sustained collaboration with Native American communities. Working with our partner museum, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, we are looking closely at practices around acquisitions, consultations, care agreements, display, and interpretation. We also have had the opportunity to learn together from institutions, including the Denver Art Museum. And these learnings will be foundational for the reinstallation of our American wing, but will also inform our approach across the institution. This is a pivotal moment for the museum. We are currently engaged in rebranding, planning a new website, developing a new strategic plan, writing a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility plan, and launching a new exhibition program. All of these endeavors are connected, mutually informed, and critical to our thinking about reinstallation. They're also a lot of work. With that background and context, am I here? With that background and context, I will address the goals, processes, and strategies for reinstalling the permanent collection at the Joslin Art Museum. I want to share the big ideas, the challenges and opportunities, and the practical information I really would have appreciated hearing when we embarked upon this journey in 2020. Like many museums, the Joslins is a collection of collections, major and smaller, some with a dedicated curator and others without. And we are a small team of teams. As curator of European art, I oversee the installation of the collection of European art from the late 13th to the early 20th century. As chief curator, I lead the reinstallation of all collection areas. I see my role as a project manager, a coordinator, organizer, budgeter, timekeeper, audience, and editor. I'm also an advocate for curatorial vision and collaboration, and occasionally a therapist. These are challenging times, and as we all know, challenging times to do what we do. We are rigorously assessing the ways in which we have done things in the past at the institutional level, the subfield level, and the broader museum field level. We're questioning our training, our assumptions, preferences, blind spots, and prejudices. And we know that the museum must be more than a temple of beauty. My personal education and training have been pretty traditional. I wrote a dissertation on 19th century French realism. I take the traditional responsibilities of a curator very seriously. And at times I have been reluctant or slow to embrace change, and I have needed prodding from my team. But this process, from collection assessments and consultations to community listening sessions using cross-departmental teams, space studies, and interpretive planning, has only underscored the urgency of developing and embracing new methodologies. This list captures some of the major steps in our process: collection assessments, strategic acquisitions, research and travel, consultations with scholars, specialists, and knowledge bearers, community listening sessions, gallery observational studies, conservation planning, articulation of goals and strategies, space planning, installation proposals, presentations to colleagues and the board, interpretive planning, layout design and construction, didactics, and then installation. Many of these projects, like acquisitions and community listening, commenced roughly where indicated here, but have continued on much longer or indefinitely. Curators began collection assessments in late 2019 and early 2020. These assessments took many different forms, including data analysis, narrative histories, and attribution summaries. And collection assessments have informed our approach to acquisitions. While not acquiring work specifically for the reinstallation, as you all know, we hypothetically collect forever. This is again a time of great change and momentum. And so Joslin Art Museum is working to keep that behind us and in our favor. We really began the work of diversifying the collection in 2012, focusing on artworks by artists identified as BIPOC and by artists identified as women. Diversifying the works on view is a pillar of the reinstallation, so we have redoubled these efforts, focusing since our closure on acquiring art by diverse creators that foregrounds cross-cultural perspective and allows us to elevate and amplify historically underrepresented narratives in the galleries. Over the last 2 years, 44% of museum purchases have been of works of art created by artists identified as women, and 82% of museum purchases have been by artists identified as BIPOC. Historical and contemporary works, including paintings, sculptures, prints, photography, textile, and installation. Among the highlights are works by Simone Leigh, Alison Janae Hamilton, Henry Payer, Elizabeth Catlett, Grafton Tyler Brown, Lynette Yoram-Bochier, Ed Clark, Juanita Growing Thunder, and Cameron Growing Thunder, Suchitra Matai, Andrea Carlson, Tom Jones, Taryn Laskin, and Hank Willis-Thomas. Recognizing the size, the discrete specializations, and the knowledge base and limitations of our curatorial staff, we have worked with scholars, specialists, and knowledge bearers to enrich our understanding of the collections we will display and interpret. Without a dedicated curator for ancient art, we engaged an outside specialist. Brian Martins, a scholar of art of the ancient Mediterranean basin, and a lecturer in archaeology and ancient history in the School of Classics at the University of St. Andrews, has reviewed the collection and offered advice on installation. When studying the Native American collection, we've engaged Indigenous knowledge bearers to illuminate objects, materials, and traditions. Steve Tamayo, a Lakota knowledge bearer, has been an invaluable advisor. While curators have conducted collections-based consultations, our colleagues in learning and engagement have been talking to our community about collections, exhibitions, programs, and their experience of the museum. At the individual and group level, in formal and more formal settings, our educators have connected with students, artists, immigrants, refugees, parents, survivors, people of diverse ethnic and racial backgrounds, and people across faith communities. Museum visitors, and as we like to say, future visitors in our community. Before our closure in May 2022, our interpretation manager also conducted observational studies to assess visitor engagement. She compiled data on visitor profiles, patterns, and paths through the galleries, and this data was compiled into narrative summaries and heat graphs, which were then shared with the reinstallation team to inform display, interpretation, and future evaluation. The Joslin does not have a conservation lab on site, nor a conservator on staff. So following our collection assessments, registrars put together a conservation plan and began to reach out to conservators in our region to address paintings, frames, objects, and textiles. Much of the museum's ancient art has not been on view for generations, and we are excited to be working on a fresh and engaging display to reintroduce these works, but many require conservation. So for much of this material, we are working with Midwest Art Conservation Center in Minneapolis. Having researched, assessed, and expanded the collection and following conversations with consulting specialists and curator and conservators, in 2022, we turned our attention to setting goals for the reinstallation. As a curatorial team, we asked how we wanted visitors to regard and experience the collection and what we hope to achieve through these new displays and interpretation. The permanent collection is permanent, but that does not mean it should be static. We knew we wanted to create flexible displays and plan for rotations. Accessibility, more of the collection will be on view than in recent memory. Display and interpretation will work to make the objects approachable, comprehensible, and in the case of Indigenous cultural belongings, easily removed from the gallery for study or ceremony. Display and interpretation will work to make the objects engaging. We want to create installations that prompt visitors to engage with works of art, with universal human themes, with difficult histories, and with each other. Connected. Historically, the museum's collection areas and their respective galleries have felt quite siloed. As a curatorial and interpretive team, we wanted to work to create connections across collections, galleries, and buildings. And finally, we hope to balance showing visitors what they know and love with the occasional surprise. We are, after all, a museum with a long and rich history and a place where people make lasting memories. After much discussion, we articulated these overarching goals: showcase the museum's permanent collection while emphasizing ongoing research and collecting, assert the relevance of art and historical objects to contemporary issues, diversify the identities and experiences represented in the galleries, and center visitors in design and interpretation. And these strategies feature diverse artists, media, and stories, develop layouts that facilitate close looking and sustained engagement with works of art, engage visitors through layered interpretation that recognizes different levels of knowledge and experience, and design for flexibility and accessibility. Next, we moved on to assigning collections to spaces on the museum campus. We studied this plan, which reflects the installation when we closed in 2022. We knew from very early on in the process that we would have a new building and that the Schrager collection and contemporary collection would occupy that space. We knew we wanted to integrate the historical American and Native American collections and that we would have a greatly expanded footprint for ancient art. We also wanted to see where we could make better use of unused or underutilized spaces. And of course, history, tradition, and donor naming were also considered. This updated plan is a preview of 2024. Ancient art will occupy the entire balcony of the Joslin Memorial Building. American and Native American art will occupy the north wing of that building, including the corridor outside the galleries. Asian art has been moved from the balcony to the South Corridor Gallery, and we have taken over some transitional spaces to the west for focused displays of decorative art. And the Scott Pavilion will now host art of the 20th century. From then, curators developed installation proposals and working with interpretation, interpretive plans. We've pursued interpretive planning in a number of ways, and I'll highlight just two recent efforts. A community discussion group has met regularly to share insight. This diverse group includes students, educators, artists, advocates, culture workers, social workers, longtime Omaha residents, and those new to the community. They were invited to convene by our interpretation manager, and they are compensated for their time. A series of meetings is focused on single works of art, hoping to glean initial reactions, interest, and what type of information visitors would want to support their viewing. This painting by Horace Vernet was acquired in 2022. It was painted before the year of the fall of the July monarchy and commemorates an incident that took place in 1791, when Louis Philippe demonstrated his heroism by saving a man from drowning. He was assisted in the rescue by Pierre-Paul Edouard, a free Black man who attended the House of Orleans and went on to have a prominent role in the Haitian Revolution. Participants were provided a reproduction of the artwork and directed to share their assumptions, questions, and connections. The interpretation manager provided additional background from a brief prepared by the curatorial assistant for European art that encouraged further discussion. Within the American wing, plans for several collaborative projects have emerged from consultations on culturally sensitive objects. One particularly exciting example is this small quilled buffalo hide believed to be a girl's coming-of-age robe. We will partner with the local Native-run nonprofit organization, Bluebird Cultural Initiative, which organizes an annual coming-of-age camp for young women. This summer, participants in that camp will study the robe and learn from traditional artists. Their reflections, told in their own words, will be prominently featured in the display. I will not dwell too long on layout, design, and construction, only to share that we have benefited from embracing both high-tech and low-tech methods, and that the commitment to collaboration has carried over into working on layouts and choosing wall colors. I want to conclude my time by highlighting the ways in which we are pursuing connections across collection areas. One of the foremost challenges of this reinstallation has been integrating Indigenous and non-Indigenous art in the American wing. My colleagues have taken great care in approaching this and have emerged with some truly insightful concepts. One of the most compelling, I believe, is a section of the installation that will focus on modernism and art of the reservation era told through the lens of diaspora. Celebrated works by Mary Cassatt, William Merritt Chase, and Thomas Moran demonstrate the influence of travel abroad, particularly to Europe, on the subject matter and style of American painting. Integrated throughout will be examples of prairie-style beadwork and ribbon work, which emerged after thousands of Indigenous people were forcibly removed from their homelands to prairies west of the Missouri River. Using glass beads from Venice and silk ribbons from Paris, these artworks tell a remarkable story of cultural exchange and resiliency. In conversations among curators, we realized that this notion of travel or migration, whether by choice or by force, by virtue of great privilege or by the most horrific of circumstances, and the resulting artistic production was a theme that resonated in several collection areas. We are now working to make this more explicit through repeating concepts, shared vocabulary, and perhaps a mobile tour. An expanded footprint for ancient art will allow us to display groupings based on geographic, chronological, and thematic concerns, while emphasizing threads of influence and cultural exchange throughout the ancient world. A Cypriot head reflecting cultural exchange between Anatolia and Greek civilizations, a vessel produced by indigenous peoples of Apulia at a time when the area was under heavy Greek influence, and a lamp depicting the port of Alexandria all demonstrate that the ancient Mediterranean basin was a highly interconnected place. The gallery, historically dedicated to Renaissance and Baroque Italian art, will still feature many of the same paintings, but will endeavor to expand on the idea of Italy as a place and as a concept that attracted artists from across Europe, and that artists working in Italy during this period extended their influence by developing an international clientele. A gallery in the contemporary building will address the global movement of people across international borders due to war, the climate crisis, and regime change, and consider how these factors register in very different works of art. A central pillar of the contemporary installation will be that artists both clarify and complicate the world in which we live. We continue to think about cross-collection themes, including history, identity, and the landscape. We honor the needs of specific collections and recognize the challenges and opportunities of different spaces in which they will be installed. Still, we hope by working across our curatorial specialties and making purposeful connections across collections, galleries, and buildings, we'll be able to create a more cohesive experience for the visitor. And we acknowledge that this reinstallation is one stage of this process and not the conclusion. Thank you, and I hope to see you in Omaha next year.
Thank you, Taylor. Next up, we have Teresa Papanikolaou, who is the Ann M. Barwick Curator of American Art at the Seattle Art Museum, where she took part in the extensive reinstallation of the American Art Galleries, which today she will be talking about in her presentation, The Stories We Carry, Reimagining American Art at the Seattle Art Museum. Oops. Hello. Thank you. What a day, right? I just wanted to thank the team here at the Toledo Art Museum for all the heavy lifting. Yay. This has been just a wonderful couple of days. It's been so great to spend a day at your museum, and especially to see the reinstallation of your American art collections, which is truly spectacular. And it's on its way to being something very important and exciting. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a similar project at the Seattle Art Museum, which is on the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people. The project in question is American Art, The Stories We Carry, which opened last October. This extensive reimagining of American art at SAM was over 2 years in the making. Funded through generous grants from the Mellon Foundation and the Terra Foundation for American Art, it has been every step of the way an ambitious, challenging, and absolutely collaborative project. It was designed to give visual weight to the fact that American art is as multi-layered as America itself is home to numerous, clearly identifiable, yet often intersecting communities, each of which is mirrored in equally layered artistic traditions and cultural practices. We set out to develop new galleries in the spirit of this complexity. So here are SAM's American Art Galleries as they previously existed. They had been largely unchanged since 2007. Their focus was on masterworks, and you might be able to pick out examples by Albert Bierstadt, Augustus St. Gaudens, Emanuel Leutze, Child Hassam, and many other notable artists active on the East Coast in the 19th century and working in the European tradition. The experience these galleries offered was largely an aesthetic one. In other words, they did not really seem to reflect the American experience, much less tell its many-sided story. They also did not talk to the galleries around them, which house our Native American, Mesoamerican, and modern and contemporary collections. Instead, they existed as an island of historical European American art in a sea of everything else, and they missed out on opportunities for intersection and dialogue. We knew that in order to break through boundaries and tell a more comprehensive, more inclusive story of American art in our galleries, we would need to take an approach that went beyond curatorial or institutional authority and create a model for proceeding based on power sharing and collaboration. And this meant collaboration among curators. And so here I am with my co-curators, Barbara Brotherton, curator of Emerita of Native American art at SAM, and Seattle artist Inye Wakoma, who is one of the founders of Wanawari, a Seattle arts initiative that reclaims Black cultural space and makes a statement about Black land ownership in gentrified communities. Together, we brainstormed answers to the big questions. What is America? What is American art? How do we define American art in Seattle and at SAM? And most importantly, who gets to decide this and why? Artists were a very important part of the project. And so in addition to Inye, we also brought on Tlingit Unanga artist Nicholas Galanin and Ipsalaga artist Wendy Redstar. And both of these artists are creating exciting bodies of work that ask important questions about American museums and the positionality of Native artists and cultures within them. And both created new commissioned work for our American art galleries, about which I will tell you in a bit.
We wanted to use this project as a pipeline for the next generation. And so we welcomed 4 interns to the team, 2 in curatorial and 2 in conservation. And they are, clockwise from top left, Carrie Karsten, Caitlin Fong, Rosa Sittigbell, and Monea Holland. All of these emerging leaders in the arts threw their own incredible ideas into the mix, and they honed their skills in the process, and they went on to do bigger and better things. Rounding out the team was our advisory circle, and these were 11 subject experts from throughout the Seattle region who brought important thinking to the project and offered valuable direction and feedback on what we would show in the galleries and what narrative directions to take. Importantly, they helped us identify gaps in the collection and what communities, like Seattle's huge Latinx, African American, and Native communities were missing and why this mattered. And together we brainstormed how to give voice to those communities. The result of all of these conversations was a wholesale revision of American art at SAM. Entering the galleries, you immediately see that we have taken a very different approach to the presentation and interpretation of American art than was previously on view in these galleries, starting with the title, American Art, The Stories We Carry. And it took us a while to land on this title, but when we did, we all felt it was pretty much perfect. The stories we carry is a familiar phrase with many emotional associations, while the pronoun we gives agency to the art and to visitors, rather than emphasizing the institutional perspective. A sound shower at the entrance to the gallery offers a greeting in Lushootseed, the language of the Coast Salish people who are native to the Seattle region. And the artwork on view is not from the American art historical canon, but by contemporary Native artists Nicholas Galanin and Wendy Redstar, whose commission for SAM is the first work you encounter when you enter the space. And it was very important to us to, whenever possible, amplify the presence of Native American art in the galleries because, as my colleague Barbara Brotherton puts it, Native American art is American art. So here's a better shot of Wendy Redstar's piece for SAM, and she has created a light box in which a collage of photographic portraits of local Native women and children rests against the Seattle skyline with Mount Rainier in the background. And the image of Mount Rainier comes from a woodblock print by Yoshida Hiroshi in the museum's collection of Japanese art. Wendy finds American art spaces and museums typically to be highly masculine, Eurocentric, and focused on the East Coast. She offers a counterpoint that is feminine, native, and focused on the Pacific Northwest. Wendy commissioned Holly Margell, a Seattle photographer and a member of the Eastern Shawnee tribe of Oklahoma, to shoot the photographs, and we issued a call to the community and opened the museum for a day-long photo shoot last summer. And here is a shot from that day along with a detail of the piece. Once past Wendy's work, you enter the galleries themselves, and these galleries reflect not a chronology of American art, but a series of overlapping themes, each one exploring the stories told and carried in America through its art. These themes are expressed through constellations of artworks from our American art collection, along with examples of Native American art and contemporary art that bring out points of intersection between all of these collections. Storied Places explores the various ways people's art and livelihoods are informed by the places where they live, especially the Pacific Northwest. And it shows how artists, both historical and contemporary, settler and indigenous, respond to this place in different ways, as seen in a constellation of artworks by a constellation of paintings by 19th century landscapists, Stanford Robinson Gifford and Grafton Tyler Brown, and contemporary Puyallup artist Sean Peterson. And the Brown, just to highlight it for a second, is a new acquisition. Brown, as many of you no doubt know, was a Black artist from Pennsylvania who came west after the Civil War with the first African-American migration and specialized in painting the California and Northwest landscapes. And this painting of the Columbia River Gorge was one of several targeted acquisitions that we made for the reinstallation, reflecting one of our strategies for amplifying the presence of Black and Brown artists in our American art galleries. Brown, along with Sanford Gifford, formed part of the landscape painting heyday in America in the 19th century as artists celebrated the nation's dramatic natural spaces and established what are now familiar landmarks like Mount Rainier, as well as a framework for experiencing them. These landscapes are largely uninhabited, save for the occasional, presumably pre-contact group of native people who are treated as essentially as characters in the myth of the American wilderness and experience the landscape as something to be looked at, traveled over, possessed. Contrast this with Sean Peterson's work on the left, and you see the familiar Mount Rainier landmark to be sure, but it's rendered using form line design and positioned as part of an origin story, with a trickster in the foreground receiving instructions from the moon to create the Northwest and its inhabitants, signaling the interrelatedness of all living beings and nature and landscape as a sustainer of life into which stories and legacies are embedded. Other artists take a more intuitive approach to nature, especially modernist artists, many of whom developed formal strategies for responding emotionally to landscape. Morris Graves's work on the left reflects his deep connection to the landscape of the Pacific Northwest and all of its inhabitants, and it's part of a series he did in the early 40s, where he was imagining the sources of the sounds he could hear at night from his home, which was in a remote part of the Skagit Valley, which is north of Seattle. And then on the other hand, Georgia O'Keeffe's important early painting, Music, Pink and Blue #1, which is on the right, reflects her efforts to create a visual equivalent to sound in her work. The monitor on the wall between the two paintings is one of what we are calling living labels, in which experts beyond the museum offer alternatives to curatorial interpretation of artworks. And in this case, the work in question is that sculpture to the left. It's Seattle sculptor George Tsutakawa's sculpture Moo, or Seaweed. And it's an abstract form that's based on the kelp forests that tower in the waterways in and around Seattle. And here's some screen grabs from that living label, which features the artist's son, Jerry Tsutakawa, who's also a sculptor and an inheritor of George's legacy. And in the video clip, he's talking about his father's work. And then as well as Meg Chadsey, who's a marine scientist with the best job ever. She specializes in kelp. Storied Places merges into a second theme, transnational America, which acknowledges that America does not begin and end with the oceans that define its continental borders, but is instead part of a global conversation at the intersection of migration, exploration, trade, and cross-cultural exchange, as expressed in a broad spectrum of objects, including landscape painting. And this is a genre that is traditionally understood as symbolizing the nation. But in fact, landscape, and particularly its subset, seascape, almost invariably speaks to the shifting of national borders, whether through westward expansion and its disruption of the very concept of a unified nation, or through trade and exploration, which expanded America's reach into the surrounding oceans, both of which reflect the colonialism that sits at the heart of the American project. Casting historical American landscape in this way enables us to interrogate its hidden histories and untold stories. Thinking of historical American art as part of a global conversation also offers new insight into American material culture, for the objects that found their way into American homes tell a complex transnational story. Take, for example, the rather unassuming tabletop array in Raphael Peale's 1814 painting, Still Life with Strawberries and Ostrich Egg Cup. And here you see Korean celadon, Chinese porcelain, a silver spoon, and an extravagant ostrich egg from Africa in a mount made of Bolivian silver. These objects speak to the empirical interest in the world's cultures that not only captivated artists and makers, but that also ultimately served to justify colonialism and expansionism. They are also the products of forces that reached beyond the boundaries that served to define America. Many works by Native artists also reflect cross-cultural encounters, and I'm showing you a display of Northwest Native American and First Nations works. Many of these objects, including basketry embellished with the American flag, an argillite sea captain figurine, a model totem pole, a pipe carved from a pistol, were created for trade with white settlers, while others, like the Stone Club collected by Captain Cook on his third voyage, reflect encounters between European explorers and indigenous people. A third thematic section is the work of our co-curator, Inye Wakoma. As a native of Seattle, Inye is interested in the economies that drove the settlement and development of the region, as well as the communities that formed as a result. And he is especially interested in amplifying the narratives that are overlooked in mainstream histories of American art. He explores these ideas in a selection of works from Sam's permanent collection, taking as his starting point two contemporaneous works, Albert Bierstadt's Puget Sound on the Pacific Coast, and Louis Sullivan's Elevator Screen for the Chicago Stock Exchange. Inye sees both works as expressions of the expanding American economy during the late 19th century. The Chicago Stock Exchange managed commodities in the West and the Midwest, and the Bierstadt, a fantastical view of Puget Sound, was painted at the request of a real estate developer interested in attracting settlers to the region and selling land to them. By installing one work literally behind the other, Inye invites us to contemplate this connection. It is impossible to get a long, unobstructed view of the Bierstadt, undoing the myth of the pristine, empty, untouched American landscape. In fact, by the time the Sullivan and the Bierstadt were created, Seattle and the Pacific Northwest had experienced many waves of human encroachment and had undergone considerable development. Inye has chosen works that speak to the many communities who have called it home, from native communities, hunters and trappers, to laborers, farmers, urban dwellers, and immigrants. In the center of the gallery is Seneca German Scott artist Marie Watt's Blanket Stories, a piece whose layered meanings represent the interconnectedness of communities within the larger whole. Marie literally collects blankets and their stories and arranges them into stacks loaded with associations, memories, and meaning. To build his checklist, Inye brought a lot of works out of storage. In fact, we all did. And to get them ready for display required our conservation team to do some heavy lifting. So the revival and treatment of artworks that had long been hidden from view, many of them by local artists, became a major part of the project. And here is our conservation intern, Caitlin Fong, with one of the most glaring case studies in this effort. This was a painting by Seattle artist Kenneth Callahan, which had become extremely unstable, absolutely unexhibitable. You couldn't even put it upright without the paint falling off. It was that bad. And it was restored. It was brought back to life thanks to Caitlin's careful hand and expertise and hard work. It took her like a year and a half. A fourth thematic section, Ancestors' Descendants, features representations of American people, and it explores how power and privilege can be conveyed and challenged in American painting. And so here, traditional portraits by artists such as John Singleton Copley, John Singer Sargent, and William Paxton point out portraiture's origins as the domain of a privileged few. These sit in dialogue with works by artists such as Kehinde Wiley, Will Wilson, Amy Sherald, and Augusta Savage, which reflect the many other, often unnamed individuals who also have contributed to the American project, and at times, as in the case of Alexander Filmster Proctor's so-called Indian warrior at the center of the space, lent their likenesses, whether purposefully or not, to the construction of stereotypes and the development of harmful narratives. Our interpretation team, led by my colleague, Erica Katayama, who is with us today, yay, developed an interactive moment in the gallery that uses portraiture, in this case, self-portraiture, to explore the issue of American identity. And the concept consists of a photo booth, which is pictured on the left, connected to a monitor that allows visitors to snap a selfie, select a background, pick a question from a set of prompts and answer it. And their image plus their question and its answer then get projected onto the wall as part of a grid of visitors, all of whom had taken a moment to contemplate who they are, where they come from, and where they feel a sense of belonging. American art, The Stories We Carry, ends or really culminates with Nicholas Galanan's commissioned work for Sam. Nicholas has created a massive neon sign that issues a powerful directive to visitors that counters the cultural markers, such as the Star-Spangled Banner, that both define its America and amplify its inequities. He also invites visitors to participate in this work, literally encouraging them to take a knee on one of the AstroTurf mats arranged on the floor in front of it and scream. And visitors are participating and in the process, probing this country's legacy of structural racism to interrogate established ideas that have been accepted as truth. In reaching back into this country's history of oppression, Nicholas advances a more equitable future, something that all of us at SAM hope we can also achieve by challenging received narratives of American art in our new American art galleries. Thank you. And if you want more info, check out our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa, for that. For our third speaker, we have Sarah Chassie, who is the Associate Curator of American Art at the Peabody Essex Museum. She has worked with the museum's American collections since 2003 and took part in the Peabody Essex's new long-term collection installation, which integrates the Native American and American collections. She will be presenting on being and belonging in America, offering new views for presenting Native and American art.
Thank you, Willow. Good afternoon, everyone. It's hard to be the last, but such inspiring talks today. And thank you so much to the TMA team for organizing this amazing opportunity. It's really extraordinary to have so many people here and virtually to talk about all these amazing projects and to talk about how we can reimagine our museums. Oh. So welcome to the Peabody Essex Museum. For those of you who haven't been here, this is a view of part of our campus. We have a large campus in the heart of Salem, Massachusetts. And our museum was founded in 1799 as the East India Marine Society. And it was founded unusually compared to many American museums by sea captains who among men sailed around the world. The requirement for being a society member was you had to have sailed around either the Cape of Good Hope or Cape Horn to become a member. And there were many aspects to the society that the founders established in the forming of the society. But one of them was to establish a cabinet of natural and artificial curiosities. And here in the center, you can see our oldest building, East India Marine Hall, which was built in 1825 as the first official home for the museum's growing collections. To the right, you can see our newest building, opened in September 2019, designed by Aeneid Architects in conversation with East India Marine Hall. And that 2019 building now houses 3 floors of collection galleries, 15,000 square feet of new collection galleries that house our maritime art collections, Asian export art, and fashion and design galleries on the top floor. And I offer this context for part of our institutional history, but also to explain a little bit more about the context of our project in creating our American and Native American galleries. So our project began to take shape as early as 2016 and 2017 when our museum leadership began planning for the expansion of our campus and started mapping out how our collection galleries would be populated throughout all our old and new spaces. Here you can see a view of our 2003 museum building designed by architect Moshe Safdie. And in the course of mapping spaces for collection galleries, it was decided that the first floor of these galleries, the galleries you see on the right, they're called our house galleries because they're inspired by the houses and architecture of Salem, that the first floor, 10,000 square feet gallery space would be dedicated to displaying our Native American and American art collections that had historically been separated in the museum. Our curatorial team was given freedom to think about how the collection should be integrated into the galleries. But our leadership, we had many early conversations with our leadership to really think about how our collections could help us explore and think about what it means to be American. I am just one part of our large team that made this gallery a reality, but in particular, I want to give credit to my co-curator and partner in the gallery, Karen Kramer, who wished she could be here with me, but here she is in representation. And so this curatorial collaboration has been at the heart of the project since the beginning. And Karen is the Stuart W. and Elizabeth F. Pratt Curator of Native American Art and Oceanic Art and Culture. And also, the beginning of the project was very much informed by our former curators of American art, Austin Bailey, and American decorative arts, Dean Lahikainen, who made significant contributions to the conceptual development of the project. Starting in 2019, Karen and I really co-led the larger project team, guided by our shared sense of responsibility to tell new and different stories of being and belonging in America. I also want to call out Assistant Curator Lon Morgan, who came on and onto the project in 2020 and was an essential collaborator with us on research, writing, and content development. Also, the project would not have been possible without very important funding support, especially from the Henry Luce Foundation. They provided transformative support for our installation and were involved in helping or watching the conceptual development of the project from the beginning. The Terra Foundation for American Art and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation also generously funded the project, along with numerous individual donors. We were uniquely poised to be able to approach this project in integrating Native American and American collections together in one gallery experience because of our incredibly rich and deep Native American holdings. We have the oldest ongoing collection of Native American art in the Western Hemisphere, and it's world renowned for its outstanding aesthetic quality, condition, and provenance. Since 1995, we've been augmenting our historical collection with contemporary Native art and showing them both together to emphasize continuity, diversity, and dynamism. PAM's American collection showcases 4 centuries of artistic traditions and cultural exchanges between the nation and the wider world. Our collection of American art has historically been focused on fine and decorative art connected to Salem and Essex County history. Key recently acquired contemporary works across diverse media allow for wider representation of American art and culture into the 21st century, although we still have a lot of work to do in that area. So I offered just 2 representative objects from each collection. On the left, Jamie Okuma's fabulous boots, and which have become iconic works in our collection at large, paired with neoclassical dressing chests by the Seymour firm of Boston, designed for Elizabeth Derby West of Salem. This is an early pairing that Karen and I had surfaced as one that had rich potential for interpretation. And many of the early pairings like this that we started working on in 2018 and 19 carried through. So it's been really rewarding to see those hold together and see our visitors engage with them. But one of the challenges we faced at the beginning of the project was figuring out how to address some of the disparities between our collections to tell compelling stories of diverse American experiences. The Native American collections are more diverse geographically and temporally, while the American collections are so much more regionally focused and more historical. Their depth is really the 17th and 9th through the 19th centuries. So those are some of the challenges we faced in starting to think about how to bring these collections together. And it's really in the fall of 2018 that we planning began in earnest on this path-breaking initiative. Our preliminary thinking of how to organize the gallery was grounded in the idea that artistic expression has the power to define and redefine our concept of America. And we held a convening with 8 advisors representing different perspectives in the fields of Native American and American art. Going into the convening, we had lists of key objects we knew we wanted to include and ideas of how we might bring things together, but the convening was an essential step in figuring out our path forward. Our advisors urged us to push at mixing the collections as much as possible to tell new stories of American experience. But they also felt very strongly that it was essential that there be sovereign sections for Native American art where it could be understood on its own terms. So here you can see sort of the generative ideas that we worked through in this convening, mind mapping, and also some of the boards and key objects. You can see that pairing of the dressing chest and the Okuma boots, and some of our advisors here sharing ideas. And it was really an amazing experience to, it was sort of affirming for all the doubts we had about how to do this, for the advisors to be really inspired by the potential of our collections to bring forward new stories. Presenting the collection installation has been a complicated creative process over well over 5 years, and engaged the talents of numerous people, including many staff members. Ultimately, we had a core project team of about 8 colleagues across departments, 9 Native and non-Native advisors, 30 different label contributors, 2 consultants, and 16 Native American fellows who worked on this project between 2018 and 2021. In the upper left, you can see Rachel Allen and Frank Redner, who were in one of the early cohorts of the Native American Fellows who worked on the project, but then went on to become staff members who collaborated on the project, Rachel as an assistant curator and Frank as an interpretive consultant. And then the other images are of the 3 different cohorts that worked on the project over different summers. And so each cohort of summer fellows worked on different aspects of the project's development. Also, I'll just note that we were really like getting up to speed after that convening and we've been working for many years in a cross-departmental way and had a robust interpretation and media teams. But just as we had really developed our checklist, started preliminary designs, the pandemic hit. So from this point forward, the project was all the conceptualization, the checklist finalization, and all the design work happened remotely during the pandemic, as so many of us have experienced for these projects. But it was enormously challenging. We lost entire departments, 40 staff were laid off. And so we really had to try to hold true to the ambitions for the project, but work in such different ways in addition to just coping personally through this time. So here we are in the galleries finally. And so on this ground, Being and Belonging in America explores our complex histories and what it means to belong to family, community, and nation in order to advance new ways of seeing and thinking about art in this place we now call America. We start the installation with an immersive experience of Native American and American artworks, painting, sculpture, photographs, a poem, document, and video. Through text, image, and sound, these objects look at different notions of belonging to place and community in America, 2 overarching themes for the entire installation. This is one portion of the intro. It's hard to sort of capture it all in one shot, but this here is a section called Contact and Crisis. The collections are in conversation together, and it's really focused on New England and in particular Cape Cod as a center of contact between English settlers and Wampanoag community members. So on the left, 2 American paintings in the collection, one which was commissioned by the East End Marine Hall for the new building in 1825, mythologizing the landing of the Pilgrims in Plymouth. And on the right, a series of works we commissioned by the Diné artist Wilson, tintypes of 3 different, we hosted a multi-day celebration with Wampanoag community, 3 different Wampanoag communities to take portraits that would be prominent in the introduction to our gallery. Across the whole gallery, through art, labels, video, and music, we lift up a chorus of voices to help us demonstrate that multiple perspectives can not only coexist, but also ask new questions about the histories, art, people, and places we thought we knew. These 2 collection areas wind like a double helix through the gallery. Collections converge and then are given space to be understood on their own. Across the space, aesthetic affinities emerge across time, culture, and geography. There are over 350 artworks in the galleries that span time from 10,000 years ago to today and demonstrate a range of voices, modes of expression, cultures, and media. And throughout, we explore links, continuities, and disjunctions between historical and contemporary objects across the collections. So it was really after the convening that we settled on this idea of having moments where the collections come together in conversation and then also separate. So that idea of a double helix where the collections are kind of weaving together throughout the space. Here you can see one of 3 Native American solo sections across the gallery. This is We Are the New Ancestors. Each Native section is rooted in indigenous knowledges that emphasize ancestral connections. In one section, among water, land, and the sky world. In another, the continuum between the past, present, and future. And in the view shown here, We Are the New Ancestors showcases indigenous self-representation, storytelling, and fashion. Likewise, there are sections that focus deeply on American art and how American artists have been inspired to capture the landscape through paintings and photographs. In another section, the international connections and influences of Salem artists over almost 400 years. And here, the section Seeing Ourselves, how diverse objects can disclose layers of meaning surrounding individual and collective identity. So you've noticed by now that we are, this is not unique to this project. It's something we have done at PEM for many years, but integrating works not in a chronological fashion, but also mixing media and 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional works. We commissioned new contemporary art for the galleries. We also did collection mining, although the pandemic sort of limited some of that in a way, but I think you can get a sense of the diversity of objects in these different sections. Native American and American art converge across the installation in 6 different sections. In addition to object groupings that look deeply at complicated histories, On This Ground offers lighter moments of joy, humor, and visual affinity. Themes of place, women's identity, and generational bonds across cultures provide a fresh look and surprising juxtapositions. Here, in A View of Legacies and Love, we explore how artists across cultural traditions illuminate the bonds between family members and community in their work. Here, Will Barnett and Wendy Red Star's portraits, paired portraits, commemorate the bonds between mothers and daughters. Another conversation section explores themes related to slavery, migration, westward expansion, the fight to acquire land by European powers in the 17th and 18th century, and also how artists at turns create and disassemble national mythologies and challenge the notion of a single unified experience. Here you see a portion of the Heroes in History section, which brings together powerful objects to share stories and different perspectives on early colonial wars and the violent international fight for lands through the 17th and 18th centuries. And one of the most provocative juxtapositions in the gallery, we've paired the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 in conversation with the Salem witch trials of 1692, 2 hugely significant events that happened 12 years apart, 2,000 miles apart, to explore themes of religious persecution and the international fights for land in 17th century America. This is just a portion of each of those sections. The Pueblo Revolt is often known as the first American Revolution, but is not really taught in our history books. Although that's shifting, the Salem witch trials, millions of people come to Salem every year to try to understand this, what is really an iconic historical moment in American history. A view of myths and motives. As the US government expanded its territory westward beyond the borders of the original colonies, American artists played a role in creating visual culture to support the country's political aspirations. Through words and imagery, the artworks in this section offer a provocative way to connect American history to the present and give us a powerful look into the country's founding principles. In total, there are 6 collection conversation sections evenly paced through the galleries, and they are distinguished by the visual cue of dark gray walls, as you can see in this diagram of the gallery. So interspersed, and then the sections with white walls are the solo collection areas, whether Native American or American. Our in-house designers, one 3D designer, one graphic designer, collaborated with us over several years to ensure that the design of our galleries mirrored our curatorial themes in the design elements, and to ensure that the space allows for conversation and connection for our visitors. For a collection installation that will be in display for, we hope, at least 10 years, and some maybe longer, they selected very good, durable materials as a core tenet of long-lasting and impactful design, and they privileged neutrality, simplicity, and durability. Dave Seibert, our 3D designer, designed these effective cutout windows through the spaces to allow for views and connections across gallery sections. We gave our designers many challenges for fitting in both objects and text and content. Here you can see our graphic designer, Jackie Trainer's final graphic hierarchy. We probably went through 20 different iterations of graphic potential for our interpretive content. And this is her final plan that maps all the different layers of content across all our sections. Likewise, collaboration was key in working with all our partners in different departments, and especially working with our one media colleague on the team. So we had a whole team of media colleagues, and for the course of this project, we only had one left. So he had an enormous challenge because we gave him 9 different media elements to incorporate throughout the galleries. And these range, they're all very different. They range from interpretive media, artworks that are media artworks, and also even a recreated period room. So here in another view of the gallery, there you go. You can see the red circles are highlighting all the different media moments featuring media throughout the space. And we worked hard to place them throughout the thematic sections, but to try to prevent sound bleed for this throughout the space. And the period room I mentioned here, you can see one of the most intensive media elements. This is actually the only section of the gallery that remained from the previous 2003 American installation, a recreation of the Salon of Cleopatra's Barge, America's first ocean-going luxury yacht built in Salem. And we decided, even though the space remained the same, we wanted to sort of reinvent it, and we created an immersive media experience to recreate the atmosphere of a breakfast that we knew took place on the yacht in 1817 on the ship's first European grand voyage. We knew all the European dignitaries present, so we imagined a breakfast that took place in this room and the conversation that might have happened. So there's lighting that shifts throughout the room, and we worked with an outside firm to design the media for this room. So the lighting and an immersive soundscape. For interpretation, we worked with a consulting interpretive consultant, Adrian Lally Hills, who helped us to develop several visitor engagement moments in the galleries that also incorporated opportunities for seating for our visitors. And there are 2 sketchbook stations where we encourage visitors to sit and reflect on the art surrounding them or their own experiences. If they open those notebooks, you can see a view inside one of them. There are prompts to inspire them to write, to draw, to reflect on their personal experiences related to the thematic section that they're in, or perhaps to reflect on the artworks on view. And as you can see, we've had some really amazing contributions in those sketchbooks. And one of the core interpretive goals for the installation was to incorporate voices beyond our curatorial team. And to achieve this, we commissioned 30 outside contributors to write extended labels for objects or groups of objects. We invited authors from various perspectives to bring their own interpretations to our collections, objects or groups of objects. The contributors included poets, scholars, curators, activists, community members, and more. and there is in fact one of our amazing contributors in the room. An expert, this is a view of 2 Chumash baskets in We Are the Land, and I'll just share an excerpt from the label written by Felicia Garcia, an educator from the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. And her, this excerpt from her label illustrates the power of these labels. When I look at these baskets, I see the land, our home. She talks about her own practice of basket making. I felt my ancestors' presence in that place. Their spirit embraced me as I retraced their steps and movements. I knew they could be woven into the basket I could create. When I look at these baskets, I see my ancestors, I see home. And so we developed a unique graphic identity for these panels. They continue sort of the theme of our theme panels with the bars, but they're black with silver bars. And so that carry throughout the space, interspersed in all the thematic sections. And these labels are to us the most successful and moving element of our interpretive approach. Another tenet of our interpretive approach was engagement questions that were incorporated at different levels, from the gallery introduction panel, which asks, by rethinking American histories, how might we envision a better future together, to the section panels that feature a question drawn from the theme of that section. The final wall by the exit features another notebook asking for visitor reflections on the gallery, with a larger question on the wall: how can we make our nation a place where everyone belongs? Marie Watts' companion species, Cosmos Sunrise Flint, 2019-2021. It's a work we commissioned before the pandemic. It holds court in the final conversation section in the gallery. And her sculpture, we commissioned this with her. Marie was also one of our key advisors on the project early on, and she held a series of community sewing circles to create this piece at PEM. And this concluding section through this work asks, how can we learn to foster interconnectedness within our communities, with other species, and with our land to imagine a better future? Ultimately, placing these collections on equal ground, literally providing equal gallery square footage and prominence, emphasizes that the American experience is unimaginable without the inclusion of Native American art, history, and culture. The Putnam Gallery is a groundbreaking collaboration between these two collections, historically separated in previous installations. The opportunity to bring these collections together allows us to tell more complex stories from broader perspectives, celebrate artistic achievements across time and space and worldviews, and create a more expansive definition of American art, in hopes that this presentation will inspire a more connected, informed, and empathetic future for us all. Thank you very much. If you haven't already visited our galleries, I hope that you do, but also we have reopened at least 5 newly open galleries, collection galleries across our museum. So there's lots to see and many different exciting and innovative ideas, and we have more galleries to come. So please come visit. Thank you.